Director Bankus? Aye. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Hafley?
Aye.
Director Jorgensen?
Aye.
Director Malpacum?
Aye.
Director Nelson?
Aye.
Director Ott?
Aye.
The ayes have it. The agenda has been adopted as presented. We do have executive session for roughly 60 minutes. Director Nelson, can you please make the motion to move into executive session?
I move the Board of Education convenes into executive session to discuss legal advice per CRS 24-6-402 4B, particular matter, employee investigation report, and personnel per CRS 24-6-402 4F, particular matter, restructuring.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Director Art reached out to me just a few moments back and wanted some clarity on executive session surrounding personnel restructuring. And this was the same way we called the September 11th, 2024 meeting when there was personnel restructuring at that point in time. This came up during the agenda setting meeting, and Superintendent Gall advised that this matter be called similarly as to what was in the September 11th, 2024 meeting. And that's how it's referenced, just as a point of reference to the question that you brought up. Discussion? Director Ross.
Thank you. I think in the future, maybe, because restructuring is very vague, and as far as the public is concerned and transparency, maybe we could be more specific in the future about what that means, or you just completely use a different term. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Director Bankus? Aye. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Hafley?
Aye.
Director Jorgensen?
Aye.
Director Malpacum?
Aye.
Director Nelson?
Aye.
Director Ott?
Aye.
The ayes have it. We'll move into session. Reconvene for the rest of our special meeting at approximately 5 p.m. Thank you.
No, it was Nicole. How are you?
Okay, how are you? Good. What's your name today?
What's my name today?
Yeah.
Last I checked, it was Jill.
I don't know if
I think it's always been that.
I'll do it.
With a few hey yous thrown in. Good to you.
This is you, Vice Chairman.
Sometimes my students would say miss or just plain teacher. And I just look at them and I say, student.
I would rather we just say that not here, then I'll do another work session when they arrive. Because all I'm doing is just all the slides. You have nothing.
Okay. Well, Principal.
How
are you?
Hey, here we go, we're good. Okay, we're good.
I feel like I've seen you every day for the last week.
I know. Just while I can do stuff like this.
Yes.
That's all I get a job.
You have to modify the
Okay, good afternoon again. Earlier this afternoon, the board adopted the agenda as presented. We have returned from executive session, and there is no need to modify the agenda. May I please have Mr. Tom Hess up here in front, and he's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Yep.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So as promised, every board meeting or the work session, there is going to be an update on Jenkins Middle School. Superintendent Gall, I'm going to turn it over to you to give the latest update on Jenkins Middle School.
Hello to the community. Thank you for being here tonight. And we're going to get my little clicky here real quick. I only have a couple of slides to share with some very important updates. The first, just to remind folks what our timeline is. We said that last week we would go through the RFP process of getting a design build contractor on board. And I am happy to announce Bryant Construction in partnership with CRP Architects are here. And I'd love for Mr. Scott Bryan to introduce himself and his team. And if you'd like to address the board and the community about the wonderful opportunity, go for it.
Well, I'd love to. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President and Superintendent and members of the board. Thank you. I'd like to just thank you for putting your trust in Bryant Construction. And let me just give you the Cliff Notes version of our company a little bit and who we are and where we came from. So by the way, my wife and I are natives of Colorado Springs. We are both products of District 11, all the way from grade school on up. And in fact, I went to Stratton, Horseman, and then Palmer. So thank you. Yeah, no, District 11 is very close to our hearts, and that's where I met my wife, by the way, was at Palmer. I founded Bryant Construction in 1995 in a spare bedroom and putting proposals together on the kitchen table. Today, we are the largest locally based contractor here. We're in the top 10 in the state. We're in the top 400 in the country. We do projects everywhere west of the Mississippi. We've touched about every state west of the Mississippi and 4 different continents around the world. I'm proud to say as of 2022, we became 100% employee-owned company. So every employee that works for Bryant's Construction is an owner, and they have an own it attitude. And I'd recommend you follow us on Instagram or whatever media you look at, because We highlight these employees and they talk about the culture in our company. For me, everything is the culture. And that's why I did 100% owned transformation. And it shows up in our past performance on all of our projects that we do. We have over 40 employees here locally that are in District 11. Our president, Brian Burns' son, went to Jenkins Middle School. So we have a tie to Jenkins Middle School. We've developed a number of partnerships around town. Obviously, when you've been in town that long, you know you serve on a lot of boards. YMCA. I was the two-term chair of the Economic Development Corporation here. I serve on a number of boards, some foundations. So we try to give back to the community every time we can. What happened at Jenkins Middle School should never happen. And I'm sorry you're going through it. You know, you build schools today, we build schools today that last a very long time. I mean, look at the schools you have in the district, look at the ones I just mentioned. So, unfortunately, it has happened, and we're here to help you. Okay, we're gonna discover a solution, we're gonna work together as a team on the solutions, and we're gonna fix it. Okay, and I think that's what you're looking for. And we'll do it in a fiscal manner. We're good stewards of your money, and we'll do it in a timely fashion. I know it's a big concern for not just the students, but the families of the students and displacement that you're seeing. So you have my word, and you have my promise, and my personal commitment that you'll be very, very happy with the team. If not, you know, you guys have my phone number, so you can give me a call. Thank you very much. I want to turn over to Doug.
So yeah, thank you for having us. Doug Woody, I'm Vice President with the company with Bryant Construction. Been leading the charge for our team as we've engaged in this fast and furious RFP process that we went through, and we're excited to be on board and to tack onto the team. So I'm just going to quickly highlight our partnership with CRP. They're another locally founded company, and on the architectural side, we've already got our structural engineer engaged, and MGA are structural engineers, and we just had a kickoff meeting today of kind of next steps. And so once again, we're going to be moving quickly. We understand the levity of the situation, but the one thing I want to reinforce is we're not going to move so fast that we don't explore all the options that are out there. So it's our job as we go through this feasibility study. We've got tons of information from the district already that we're sorting through, and as we begin to put this together, and we're waiting on some other pieces to come in, that you have my commitment, obviously Scott's and the rest of our team, that we're not going to leave any stone unturned. So, but we're excited to tack onto the team. This is not anything foreign to us. We've been in a lot of these situations to where we need to create solutions, and quickly. And so that's our task and our job, and it's not lost on us on how quickly we need to move. So, but thank you for the opportunity to address you guys tonight. I'm personally going to be involved, and I guess I should have started with a little bit of background. I'm also a Colorado Springs native, so I've been in the community, understand a lot of the pieces, parts that go into these things, and schools are a big piece of that. So how we re-envision and fix Jenkins and get families back in there is important, and one that we will put 110% effort in. It's got our full attention, as well as CRP architects, and we're ready for the what's to come, and helping you guys be a good team member to figure this out. So, thank you.
Any questions for?
Yeah, hang on a minute. Superintendent Gall, do you want to complete your?
We're on time.
Okay.
Moving forward with great urgency as directed by the board.
Okay. Board, any feedback or comments or questions at this time? I see none from the board, so thank you. Thank you for stepping into this space. And just like you said, this was not what we had anticipated, but having a local company with your experience, and then also the promise that you made out here that the community, it's going to resonate with the community as well, that you stand behind the work that you guys do. So we look forward to this partnership and future meetings where you can come and present the options and then figure out the next steps ahead. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. You're done too with you. Okay. With that, seeing no further business, if there are no objections, this meeting will adjourn at 5:12 p.m. Yep.
staff member to put together a plan. And now the next time we did this, we took the entirety of the design thinking process to bring the best of what everybody had to offer to make sure that we're providing what our children need to be successful going forward. So I'm going to ask Chief Ottmer to drive and introduce the rest of the team.
Perfect. Melissa, can you click back to the PowerPoint? I think it's stuck on the thing. Oh. Thank you. Okay, so as Superintendent Gall said, this went through the design lab. I'll let the team talk a lot more about that. But the premise of starting, you'll see this in the how might we statement, was to keep rigor really high and also think about the student experience that we've been talking about throughout the BFI triangle. The team started grounded in the board priorities, knowing that improved student outcomes is a major component here. That always was brought back to as we worked throughout the lab. In the lab, these are design principles that we use, making sure that people come to the space, their voice is heard, they bring their unique experiences, and we also lift that up into what does the system need across D11 to ensure that when students graduate from high school, they have a future plan. This is also connected to the Future Ready and Future Centers that we've talked about, as well as peak experiences. You're going to hear convergence of major district strategy in what we're bringing you in the graduation updates. With that, I'll pass to Mr. Smith.
I would just say the last time I was here and what we learned from that experience in terms of a larger cohort of stakeholders involved in the process. I think about the concepts and content that our community brought forth during that time as very important pieces. And then just the idea that we took that information and applied it to this design thinking process as we revisited the graduation requirements these past few months, and I think it played a pretty crucial role. So that was a plus. That was still a positive the first time around. And to tell us more about that process, Jennifer, tell us more.
Good evening, board, and thank you, team, for being here tonight. Really a wonderful experience walking through the design thinking process with our task force team. So we embarked on the design thinking, co-creating our how might we statement. We're very intentional about, as you've heard, grounding in this idea of rigorous academic standards, but also increasing agency for our students. We did look at data to kind of ground how we were creating and co-creating that how might we statement. And as we embarked on this process, we had 13 school-based task force members from a diverse range of schools. So from our opportunity schools as well as our comprehensive high schools, we had administrators. We tried to think about our different content areas. So again, 13 school-based members, and then again 10 central-based task force members from a broad range of areas, including counseling and special education, as well as content facilitators as we went through this process. Just a view of our journey in the Design Thinking Lab. We began this work in the fall of 2024 after some preparation work as Area Superintendent Smith spoke to, just kind of grounding in like where we have been before, what we learned as we tried to bring this forward in reimagining high school graduation requirements. So really thinking through that as we embarked on the task force work. And we went through, again, the co-creation of the how might we statement, bringing in kind of inquiry, looking at models, looking at research, looking at data, and then creating opportunity statements from some of that data that would further guide us. And then we began the process of ideating and creating our prototypes. We began with 4 prototypes, and again, you can see in some of the visuals, we have the academic standards named. So again, that idea of grounding in the rigor, but also thinking about agency and thinking about how we can broaden the opportunities for our students to have a very clear post-secondary workforce readiness goal and pathway identified. We went from these 4 prototypes to 2, and then it converged to one. And in that process, we continuously went back to the communities, or rather the task force members did, went back to their communities to seek feedback from their SACs, from students, from other teachers. So we're able to use that feedback as a mechanism to refine and iterate forward.
Thanks. So you can see here our current graduation requirements, 46 credits. You're familiar with the document on the left. The document on the right remains the same. That's the demonstration of knowledge coming from the state. And of course, here in District 11, if you look at the last line, we have an intense focus on SAT at the high school level. So that's our shining, our pointing, our North Star. That's where we're headed. And it doesn't change as we look at our new, at least proposal of what we might consider moving forward. If you look at this slide, you're actually looking at a really good visual of our graduate profile skills. And the way we've laid this out is you have academically ready learner, and you have continuous learner, and then you have 6 graduate profile skills that are listed underneath those two. And just to show that the academic ready learner and the continuous learner are really connected the way we've laid this out to the 6 that are below. And that leads us to our next slide. I think the thing that's pointed out here is we actually have two proposals today. One is A, the other is B, as you'll see in the slides coming up. Slide A has 36 required credits, and proposal A has 31 required credits. 19 of those credits are what we would call, we actually call those continuous learner credits. And in proposal B, that number changes to 35 required credits, and that leaves us with 15 of our continuous learner credits. So here's proposal A, kind of spelled out, and we lined it right up with our current graduation requirements. And I think there's a couple things to note. The first thing is, under skilled communicator, we connected that to our English ELA curriculum, and there are still 8 credits that are required in that category. If you look at innovative problem solver, you can see there's 6 credits that's connected to our math curriculum. Nothing's changed in those 2 boxes as compared to what we currently are operating on. I would note at the very top, proposal A has 50 total credits required, and there is, say it again. Nothing else?
No, that's just a water bottle.
Sorry. And I would note that you'll see the term peak experience connected to our both our proposals today. Moving down to critical thinker, 8 credits. Well, what is that connected to? That's connected to science. And you can see biology is still listed as is where we'll replace those 2.
Let them finish the presentation.
Before we have a question. Is there anything else we would add before we talk about our timeline, team?
I do think it's important to just note, and maybe go back, if we could go back to the slide. I think we were very intentional about grounding and aligning credits in the grad profile, really operationalizing the graduate profile. We have heard from industry leaders that they are looking for these durable skills. We have continued to work in our scope and sequence work as we have started in both English language arts and in mathematics to look at the progressions in the graduate profile and really tie those directly with our Colorado academic standards. And so I think it was very important for the team to acknowledge and operationalize the graduate profile, because it is about, yes, we are academically ready learners. We are preparing our graduates to enter in the world and do and become whatever it is that they want to become. And by grounding it and aligning it to grad profile skills, it really grounds in a why am I taking this English class? I'm taking it so that I can become a skilled communicator. And that when I go out in the world and I have invested my time and energy, especially in that bucket of 19 credits, like I know fundamentally that I am a skilled communicator and I can go out and be a TED Talk star or whatever it is. But I've also done all these credits that have given me the concrete specific skills in the Colorado Academic Standards, but I also know my why. So I think that is what, I mean, I'm speaking for the team, but I think that was very important, very intentional.
I think the other thing I want to add is I think one of the really important pieces for us too was to maintain rigorous expectations. That's a non-negotiable. This is not about lowering expectations. This is really about how do we think in the year 2025 about how students are ready for college and career. How do they find their learning relevant and meaningful and exciting and build engagement in school and ultimately in their choices beyond, all without ever losing the rigor, keeping the bar and the expectation very high for all kids in our high school experience.
And one thing I would also point out is that one of the distinguishing ideas in academically ready learner is that is this space of acquisition. So we're acquiring the skills and knowledge that are necessary for us to then apply and transfer in a way that allows for greater agency, perhaps an industry certification that then can lead to a job.
I would just echo that if you go to the next slide. So what Jennifer was just mentioning, when you look at proposal A on the left side that doesn't have the blue box around it, that's a lot of the classroom time where we're acquiring skills. Not to say there won't be demonstrations of mastery within that, but one thing we know, when you truly know something, you have transferability of the skill. And so those 19 credits in this proposal on the right-hand side of the diagram, that's what we're saying. You take the mathematics and you apply it. So Liz has a couple examples of that from having recent graduates.
I have recent graduates, but I also was just at the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, and I think when we limit what kids have to take in this sequence, right, it limits opportunities. I think some districts are doing some really interesting things with the idea of how are we creating relevance for kids so that when they take math, they are also understanding application of mathematics. So for example, a geometry class could be applied geometry, which actually leads to students applying their learning in building or constructing something in the community, right? Like there's an application of learning so that kids see the connections and the relevance from their class to a possible career, right? Or a new pathway. And so I think in these proposals, there is opportunity for kids to exercise agency and choice, right? Aligned to interests or new experiences that they might not otherwise have the opportunity to have. So I think that's a huge component of both of these proposals.
Let's get through the next steps. Let's go through it pretty quick to get to some questions. All right, timeline. Jennifer, go for it.
Okay. So high-level overview, there are going to be, this is connected to policy, IKF, and so we will need to do a revision to policy. So this timeline stamps that, but then also kind of offers up this idea of training communication plan. We also know that there is some deeper work that the task force would take on, a small group task force would take on in terms of, you know, thinking about course coding and thinking about the training for counselors and also the communication plan. So that's that.
And wanting to roll this out all of 2025 for freshmen.
For the freshmen.
For freshmen.
So all the students that are in sophomore, the old graduation requirements still apply.
You could consider, as we dig into this, you could consider including sophomores into this space because it's already lining up significantly, I mean identically almost.
To the number of credits they've already earned as freshmen,
Right.
you could put sophomore in at the same time without it changing any of their on track to graduate in the 4-year time.
And you might have mentioned this at the very top and maybe I missed it. The reason we are going from 46 credit requirements to 50, is that coming from the state level?
No, so the 46 credits, I did mention it, thanks for asking. 46 credits that we are currently under right now are based on the old model where we had 7 classes a day, or 7 classes a semester. And if you do the math on 7 credits, and maybe most kids take 6, I mean, long story short, 7 times 2 is 14 times 4, you have 56 credit opportunities under our old system. That's where the 46 comes from. In the block schedule, you do the same math, you have 8 opportunities. Now you have 64 credits and 64 opportunities to earn a credit in 4 years. That's where the 50 comes from. Upping the rigor, and there's plenty of time and plenty of opportunity to earn 50 credits in our system.
Okay. So nothing that is mandated by the state for us to move from 46 to 50, just because we have more, with the block schedule, more opportunities available for our students to take classes. Director Art?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question on proposal B, if you want to go back to that slide. The innovative problem solver, the math one, I think it is, it says algebra 1, 2, and 4 additional math credits. That doesn't add up to 8, so I think 4 should be 6, just as a question.
That was probably a late addition to the slide where we just didn't thank you.
Yeah, you copied it over from proposal A presumably. So just to double check then, you were adding the requirement of algebra 2, correct?
That was in the previous, that's always been a graduation requirement, even maybe the last 10 years, roughly.
Okay, because when I look at the one on the left, it just says algebra 1.
Okay,
That's how I interpret 2 semesters of first year
I
algebra.
can explain that to you.
Okay.
Algebra 1 on the left is first year algebra, which includes algebra 1 and 2.
Oh, okay.
Well, year of algebra includes algebra 1 and 2. So now we've just,
Semester.
Gotcha.
yeah, we've
Code things.
we've coded it a little different on the right-hand side.
The other thing that I think would be helpful to me in understanding all of this is to have the system on the right. I love how it identifies with the strategies or the categories, but my mind wants to say, you have 2 credits of humanities, what's on the right? And I have to look around. Because it comes like physical education and health. I count that as 4 credits there. But then when I look at healthy and balanced learner, it looks like we lost a credit. And I'm curious, are we losing a credit?
We're not losing a credit, it's recategorized.
Yep, you can choose now.
To have students, so in that 15 on the side, there's more flexibility for students to say, sit with their guidance counselor, sit with a future ready counselor and say, my path is this, what courses would apply here that I could add on? So it allows more flexibility rather than aligning every student to take the exact same classes across their high school experience.
My understanding was that we didn't before, 3 credits of PE and you got your that 4th equivalent, 1 credit of health. The children could take different courses in Coronado and
With PE courses?
climbing, yes. I mean, that's PE 3 credits versus now we have 3 credits total under healthy and balanced learners. So that doesn't add up for me, so.
Well, I'm hearing what you're saying. If you take I'm gonna reiterate what Nicole said. If you take the 15 credits in the right-hand column, think of it as the PE, that additional PE credit lives in that space. It's still there. We just haven't spelled it out the same way because of the how might we statement of opportunities, choice in their learning. I mean, it's just the vision of kind of where we started.
Right.
If I could maybe help.
But it's not required.
Right, so I think that it's, if a student is really into music, they maybe wanna do an extra music class instead of that extra PE. Or maybe they're a varsity sports player and now they can go do welding because that credit is freed up.
Or take more concurrent enrollment classes, right? Get college credit.
So I understand that.
Okay.
But what it comes down to is we are not requiring as many PE credits. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so that is what I'm getting
That's
at.
what you're asking.
Yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
Yes.
and so that's where if I had credit requirement with the left hand with the right-hand credits on the left-hand schedule, if you will, that would be easier for me to understand, like what are we gaining, what are we losing? And it doesn't have to be losing necessarily, right? There's more options, and I love more options because that it could be more engaging to our students. But similarly, for something like social studies and econ, that on the left-hand side adds up to 7 credits, and then empowered citizen, we are taking economics into empowered citizen as a category, social studies,
Right.
and we're losing a social studies credit.
Not in proposal B.
I'm looking at proposal.
So proposal B has, it has 6. And, I see what you're getting at, because you're including economics underneath
Yeah.
social studies, I understand, yes.
So
You are
something
correct.
disappeared, so are we not teaching is American history, it looks like US is AKA American, so if those are the same. And civil government used to be something we required.
It's civics, it's
I was
government.
gonna say, you must have changed the name, it's
Yeah.
never been civil government.
Right? I was like,
It's been-
civil?
no,
I
it's
had to
been
go look that
civics.
one up. I think
So
civics
civics,
or.
and this is what I think is really interesting about, because I think you're, like, it is, I think, challenging to kind of do this one-to-one comparison, because at the end of the day, the state requires that we teach embed a Holocaust unit in civics. Those are the requirements at the state level. So I think we were intentional about, trying to like ensure that we meet the here requirements, which are a little bit more specific, and
Can you spell that acronym?
sorry, yeah. I always do that. The acronyms, higher education academic requirements, right? And offering more flexibility. So in terms of a one-to-one comparison, we are losing, but there's more possibility to gain more courses aligned with a pathway choice in the realm of humanities or a social studies.
But there's no guarantees, is how it feels as I look under your academically ready learner list. It's like, sure, we have more flexibility, but there's no guarantees.
Guarantees of specific courses.
Well, things like, if we feel that PE and being a healthy and balanced learner, and that appears in our 15 instead of our previous 3 requirements. So just.
I think it's not no guarantees, it is different guarantees. It is things like for a PE credit, you could look at this as a loss. You could also look at it as, in that other category, are there other things that could count for PE credit that we haven't been counting for PE credit right now that are peak experience connected? So I think it's just a different allocation of that. It's not that they wouldn't take it, it's that it might fit differently based on their interests.
They don't have to. They might go take a
They
music
still have to
class.
they still are taking far more than the minimum required by the state. It is an adjustment though. If we just did one-to-one, I would go back to the question of why would we change anything?
Yeah.
So it's not gonna line up exactly the same, otherwise it would be exactly the same and we wouldn't invest in changing it.
And I do think that there is one thing that maybe, because it does, we were very intentional about grounding in the Colorado academic standards, so we still have to meet the Colorado academic standards. So we have to offer opportunities that are going to allow students to meet the Colorado academic standards for physical education. So we would be offering those classes and through our future centers, guiding them to those places. It just gives more opportunity to do some targeted guidance to meet the standards.
Yeah, and the previous total number of credits is 46. Now you're requiring 4 more credits for these students to graduate, so therein comes a little bit more rigor in expecting more from our students. We are not lowering the bar, we are setting the expectations higher.
That's all for now.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director Nelson.
So what I see is that when I went to the links that were on the slide before this one, and it took me to the higher education admission recommendations by the Colorado Department of Ed, the concern was that we weren't meeting those minimum requirements. So I appreciate proposal B meets those minimum requirements for students to enter a four-year college. And I like that we're trying to be more flexible for kids. But I think we do need to just as a board sort of decide where's our bar, and is it that we wanna say all students need to meet that minimum requirement for a four-year college and then we can have flexibility after that point? Or are we willing to, cause I think proposal A, they could still get there, it just maybe would take a little bit more of intentionality by the counselors and the students to make sure they're actually hitting the number of math credits. And I hadn't caught that, I thought the proposal B actually got us to the social sciences requirement in higher ed, and so I don't know if they would count economics or personal finance, or if we actually are still a credit short there. So that might be something to consider, like, yeah, do we need to add that back to meet the 3-year requirement that they say for higher ed? So I would just kind of float that out as a question for the board to consider, like, where's our bar that we wanna land at?
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I would say yes, and if you look at proposal A, every kid is on track to meet the HERE requirements until their junior year. So every kid is right on track to get there, and then there, by the numbers, I mean, you get 28 credits, 31 is required, so it's in their junior year where maybe those decisions would start to be made about how it ends for students. Or actually how it begins, right? It's really about how we want to start our students, that starting point when they graduate. That's what we're talking about right here.
And I just wanna name math in particular. Right now, if you look at current grad requirements, there's 6. And so proposal B ups that to 8, ups it to 4 years. So right now, if you think about here, there's already 6 required in current graduating classes, and kids have still been eligible for college. So we are changing by adding 8, where 6 has been our experience. So to that point, if kids have that plan path, it's already happening in the system, that they're getting access to that even though it doesn't say 8 right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because maybe that's a situation where a student is like at calculus by going into senior year, and then they're going off to a college that's like, well, we'll teach you calculus. It's okay if you only had 3 years. And so if they decide not to take calculus that senior year, it's okay because they're already at the higher level.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come to you. Director Hayfield.
You ready? I have a number of questions, and I think you know where I'm coming from.
Maybe.
Okay, so I want to start by taking a step back before we go into what this is being proposed as. I'd like to know how the relationship with middle schools affects this plan. As a high school teacher for 30 years, I can tell you middle school kids were not prepared for high school, and essentially they were set up to fail high school. And so I noticed on slide number 9, under number 2 of the design iterations, a couple of the sticky notes, I think the idea of a freshman course could be beneficial. What would that look like? At Coronado, we have study skills, and I feel it's not working. So it seems to me that freshmen across the board are struggling, coming from a middle school environment into all these expectations now in a high school. So I'm just curious if that's being, I mean, I know that as a board we're looking into that, but outside of us, is that something that's actually being addressed?
That middle school proficiency plan is
Yeah.
gonna come forward to the board, and so yes, there's convergence between the two, and it's important to think about that transition into high school. We do know that that's something that we need to prepare for. Not that this is the final answer, but we also know next year's calendar that you all just approved has that first day of school for K, 6, and 9 at those transition periods. Not saying one day is enough, but we're recognizing that and also applying it through that middle school proficiency work.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that that's being addressed.
There's also a connection for the CTE work that we've done in middle schools.
Okay.
For kids to have a clearer progression between what do I do with this work-based learning opportunity I got in middle school, and now how do I transition that into high school? Many of the obstacles for kids right now, as the team talked about, is we have a myriad of offerings of which they can't quite seem to figure out how to fit into their schedule. Not because it's too hard, just because we're not prioritizing it and saying these offerings for CTE should be, and this year are, in the same course catalog as every other course. That's the first time we've been able to build that bridge that says whatever drives your interest in school and meets our collective agreements of the state minimum for rigor to be college eligible and still be able to pursue access to career, particularly locally in Middle Springs with our workforce development, is an opportunity for us to get a more connected vertical continuum.
Okay. Between the proposals in terms of social studies classes, it looks like both of them say, I mean, currently there's 6 credits that kids have to get under their belt, regardless, because that's current. But the difference between proposal A and proposal B looks like 2 credits. Where's that coming from? So there's world history as a requirement in proposal B, but it's not being required in proposal A.
Right.
We never, and please correct me here, Darren, but when freshmen came into Coronado at least, they were guided into a world history course. It wasn't necessarily required. If they didn't want to take world history, they could take an human
Geography.
Thank you, human geography course instead. I can tell you as a former history teacher, I'm always about history. So I'm never going to go against not taking history. It's going to be more history for me because I think kids need that strong foundation of where they came from. If they don't understand where they came from, they're not going to be able to be successful in the future. And they're going to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And that's a problem if we expect kids to be succeeding in every other aspect of their lives. So just so you know where I'm sitting, history is very important. And while I don't really understand where the genocide comes in parentheses after world history, is that
It's a requirement
It should
by
be
the state.
is that
It's
that's part of
It's
the Holocaust is its own.
It's not its own course.
It's
It
just
is
required coverage.
So when I taught
coverage.
World War II,
Right.
I taught American history.
Right.
Holocaust wasn't necessarily an American thing until much later, right? So
And it is in the US history, the team did a deep dive into this, so that it is in the US history, kind of as we look at standards and evidence outcomes, and you probably know this already, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So that we can cover the Holocaust within US history.
Yeah.
I think if we are looking for broader coverage, then the possibility of adding the world history to get additional credits, but I think there's also a possibility where you recommend that it's a flexible history credit, right? So I think that's where your feedback is important.
I'm not sure I understand the idea behind the flexibility of that, considering the Holocaust, and in my classes I did spend a lot of time on the Holocaust. It got more difficult every year I taught it, just from experiencing that and bringing in guest speakers who survived the Holocaust that live in Colorado now. That was always very hard, but very important for the kids. So I don't necessarily believe that something like that, especially considering the climate that we live in today, should be a flexible thing. If we're going to be teaching the Holocaust, then by golly, we should probably be teaching that, considering what's just happened.
We're not saying that's flexible.
Okay, good.
No, that's a
That's a
requirement.
requirement by the state.
So
Okay, good.
It's just which course does it,
But
Does it fit?
So
Well,
it's-
you're going to teach it in world history if you
Right.
get to that
Yep.
era of
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Certainly, you're going to
Absolutely.
teach it in United States
Right.
history. That's part of the
Right.
curriculum.
Right.
So that's why it lives in both proposals. US
Okay.
history lives in both of the proposals with the Holocaust embedded in that curriculum, so it's non-negotiable.
As a requirement.
Okay, so then the question is, we are saying yay or nay to proposal A or B?
You know?
I think that's part of the request that's coming in front of the board. From what I see, proposal A has 19 credits that are assigned in the far right column for students to flexibly choose their pathway. Proposal B has 15 credits and more required academic credits, and 2 of the credits are required under math and 2 are required under social studies, I think. That's the difference that we see between both policies, both proposals. But we can get to that. Do you have any other questions?
So there's not 3 different things here we're talking about, right? So like when we talked about the cell phone policy, we didn't go into it saying, well, we think there might be a cell phone policy, let me hear what you have to say about that. No, we went into it saying, look, this is gonna happen. How it's going to happen is what we're talking about. So that's what I wanna know. This is going to happen. How it's going to happen, A or B, is what we're talking about. Is that correct?
Yes, that's up to the board. That's our
But
recommendation.
that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
We could decide to do nothing and leave them as is. That would be the
Yes.
third
Yeah, that would
option.
be the
That's what I was wanting to know.
Yes,
Is
that would be the third
option?
option. Then we go back to the 46 required credits.
But then, what's the point in that if we're going to be creating these peak experiences and all these pathways for kids? We need to have something like that. So I'll just tell you right now, if that's the case, we're going A or B. I'm always for more social studies. I'm always for more history. And I can tell you how many kids come to me after they've taken a history course and saying, I wish I had paid more attention. I wish I had taken more history courses. And so if we provide that for them now, they may go into it kicking and screaming. They'll come out of it like, oh my gosh, don't tell anybody, but I really enjoyed that. So
proposal B is what you're leaning to.
if you're telling me A or B, and we're not changing, or we are, whatever she said, then I'm a B.
Okay. Any other questions that you had?
No, thank you.
I'll come back to you, Laura.
Oh, yeah.
Jason was waiting. Jason.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning B just as well, for pieces already said, but I think I wrote down the pathways idea, and it sounds like by sophomore year, we know freshman, sophomore are doing what they need to do. But at that time, at the sophomore year, is a critical piece where that counselor comes in and can start looking at the way we're building out this peak pathways to say, is this student entrepreneurial minded? And then what 15, if you look at B, what 15 credits would help shape that guide for them? Or they're military oriented, okay, this, or they're college bound, or they know they're going to college, great, here's those 15 we would recommend for that. Or the trades CTE piece. So I think that the reason that we're looking at A or B versus leaving it how it is so that we have the ability to continue with the mission we've already told Mr. Gall and his team to do, which is pathways and excellence through experience and finding your excellence. So if we leave it as where it is, there's not that ability to go into the ICAP and the pathway piece. So I think that's what I'm excited about. And I do like the controlling a little bit more of making sure they give the social studies a little bit more of the math. I met with my counselor every year and I just said, I don't want to pay for classes in college. So if I got to take a 4th year of rhetorical writing, which I hated and barely got to be in, as an A student, I did it. So that's what we were talking about here at the table of saying, we're going to get you across the finish line so that you're not having to pay or, for a world language class in college because you only took 3 years of it when you should have taken 4. So part of that would be that college pathway, right? Of, hey, knock out these in high school while they're free or concurrent so that you're in better shape for college for those that are on that pathway. That was a ramble, but I like B.
Okay. And the thing that appealing with either proposal A or proposal B, whichever way the board leans on it, it requires 50 credits as opposed to 46 credits previously. Right now, when I enter high school, kids have so many free periods that they are not taking any classes in, and they are just sitting in the cafeteria or walking out of the school. Now that we have 8 classes that they can have with a block schedule between 2 days, and 64 total credits that they can possibly take through the 4 years. Just saying 46 credits opens them up for a lot more open periods where they don't do nothing, okay, and take time off. Now we are saying at least you need 4 more credits, be in classrooms as opposed to being out, doing something.
Okay, so I'm gonna tack on to what Director Hafley was saying. I want there to be the minimum requirement for college of the 3 years of social sciences. And so however that looks, I am flexible, to me, it doesn't have to be world history. If there's another option and you can roll in that Holocaust study into a unit thing, that's fine, but I would like it to be the 6 credits. And right now, because the personal finance and economics is there, it actually doesn't hit the 6 credits, so I don't know how we need to wicker that.
Is that personal finance a business course?
No, I mean, it can live in a lot of different places, but it does live in social studies departments, it lives in business departments, it's either one.
So it would qualify as the higher ed, personal finance would qualify as higher ed for social studies? Oh, okay. And then coming back to the math, after this conversation, I'm kind of walking back what I was originally thinking, because I mean, I'm a perfect example where I was in AP Calculus my senior year, and then I thought, I don't want to work this hard. No, I don't want to do this my senior year. I had senioritis, and so I dropped it, which I greatly regretted when I went to the School of Mines and had to take calculus twice because I got a D the first time. So had I taken it senior year, even if I didn't do well, I would have been better off. So that's the struggle I have. If I had stayed in it, I would have been better off in the long run. But I still got into this engineering school with only 3 years of math because of the level I got to. So I kind of recognize that maybe there does need to be that flexibility, because math is something that you just can climb as you are able, whereas history, we don't really do that so much, progress that way. Does that make sense? So I'm open to maybe having a little more flexibility with the math one and kicking 2 credits back over.
I want to echo Director Nelson's comments. Having taken calculus in high school and passed and gotten whatever I needed to get exempted when I went to college, when I got to college at the Air Force Academy, the answer was, your high school calculus is not the same as the Air Force Academy's calculus.
But you were already better off,
So
probably.
I had senioritis as well, and I got my 5 or whatever on the test. But I want to make sure that we ground in the problem that we're trying to solve, and we certainly are hearing the inputs from the board. But we have a very clear problem with how our students are engaged in their learning environment. And I don't think it's this generation and our generation. I think it's the same with every generation. We're missing the fact that our children are asking for a slightly different experience than the experience that we had. Our children are hyper excited about our CTE programs, our internships, our partnerships, our apprenticeships, getting our kids out of the building to demonstrate the learning that we've given them will get them back into the building. When you look at our attendance rates, when you look at our dropout rates, when you look at the challenges that we've had in secondary, particularly at the state level, on what we call page 3 from the SPF, which is really what happens to all these kids afterwards, our insistence of thou shalt take the exact catalog that I took is not translating for them.
Thank you.
It just is not working for them. I will obligate the administration to, if we go and get a thumbs up from the board to go in this direction, we'll measure the crap out of this over the next year. We'll look at the number of kids that took courses that were taken the year before, and sometimes the names changes, but we'll show if we're seeing a precipitous drop off and nobody wants a 4th year of math. Our goal is not for kids to opt out of a 4th year of math. Our goal is to take that 4th year of math and say, I like working with my hands. If I'm in careers in construction, can I get geometry applications by hanging a window and swinging a door? Again, if you can do that, you can pass the 3, 4, 5 triangle. So I think that's what we want to make sure that We will measure it to make sure we're not going down a slippery slope of softening expectations. We're trying to solve for how do our kids get excited about school.
I just want to clarify, I don't know if I came across as the point I was trying to make. I'm supportive of having that flexibility with math. I'm just saying that I made not a great choice in my time, but I'm not saying we need to do that for these
Yeah.
kids, that we need to lock them in to not being able to make the choice I made. Let's give them that flexibility.
And I know that I'm foolhardy in thinking that our relationships between our students and counselors is just, boy, let's ideate on what we could do with our lives. I know that for a lot of our kids, getting them just to the future center of the counselor's office is the biggest lift. I was advised to take 2 more years of foreign language and I didn't. And then I had to take them when I went to college. And so I too made that wrong choice. So I can't guarantee that every time we'll make a recommendation and the student will buy off on it. But I do think we want to get some measures around it to see if it does increase the value of, we had a young student from Palmer who is on the IB pathway who literally said, oh, I skip that period every day because it's not of value to me. And it's like, this is the brightest of what we have and the most rigorous of what we have to offer. And their answer was, oh, that's kind of an internal study period for me. So I think it's really about engagement that we want to be able to solve for. And certainly hearing the don't let go of the rigor piece from the board.
Okay. A couple of board members that didn't ask any questions. Director Carey, you are good. Director Bankus, you're good. Okay. Director.
One other follow-up, the empathetic collaborator had only 2 credits. It just seems like it's forgotten. That could be, is that 2 semesters of language that equals 2 credits, or is that 1? You can help me out there based on the, okay, I'm getting the.
That's 2.
That's
2 semesters.
2 semesters,
Each
so,
semester gets you a credit.
so we're asking for like 1 year of world language, which I would be curious about.
At a minimum.
Right, but that's
Yeah.
all we're requiring. And I would be curious for your higher education, going back, higher education academic requirements, does it require just 2 credits of foreign language, does it
1
require
year.
4?
1 year.
One
So
year?
2 credits.
Okay,
So we mean it.
because there was more.
But
Okay,
I love the idea of let's actually add to the graduate profile more offerings that meet that idea. And so again, this idea of a well-rounded student is sitting down with a guidance counselor that says, you demonstrate lots of interest in career fields around empathetic, empathetic collaboration. I was stuck on collaboration. How can we add to that? And so I think our work would be, how do we crosswalk our current offerings to make sure that we're not 8, 8, and 8, and then 6, 2, and 3? And so how does that create a place where those credits can be either used in multiple places? Because again, it's really hard to say that if you're taking a foreign language, that only makes you an empathetic collaborator and not a empowered citizen or a skilled communicator. Right. But it's for kids to be able to piece these things together. And again, in the holistic way that we're trying to talk about our students, we've been bringing now for the last 3 months students who demonstrate a good breadth of the graduate profile forward in our student profile. And a lot of times we get lost in how fun it is to talk to the student. But if you look at the piece of paper that we put up on the screen, we're highlighting the graduate profile pieces that student has been hyper invested in to show that we have a myriad of different ways for kids to get to what we would consider high school and future success after that.
And I maybe want to add too that I think that while we have bucketed them intentionally, the team, I think that there's also another scope of work that's happening where we're taking the graduate profile progressions, so the, kind of the really finite kind of skills that fall under these, and we're mapping those to courses in our scope and sequence work. So it wouldn't be the only place where we are nurturing empathetic collaboration, because I would also say that our work that we're doing right now with student agency in shifting the cognitive lift of students in our math classes and our visual and performing arts classes specifically, that is really like getting kids to socialize their learning is also that. So I think again, we've mapped intentionally, and there's also spaces where they're going to get those skills in maybe all of the classes.
So one of the things, thinking back to when my kids were in high school, is you can have that overlap.
Yes.
Things can
Yes.
be in the same
Yes.
categories or
Yes.
different categories at the same
Yes.
time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was
Remember, it's always a
definitely
challenge.
lots of discussion about the categories.
Right. Well, and that makes sense to me. I would support, even though having more under empathetic collaborators. And I know CTE is up front, and I think of that as, to some comments that were made earlier, CTE sounds like we want you to be in there in auto shop. And that doesn't sound the same to me as visual and performing arts and world language and humanities. It's just not. Maybe it'd be sales, but, I
It's
will
good money
be-
in sales.
Yeah, I would be really curious, to see how those fall out, if you will, and what CTE, I could see early childhood education programs might fit in there. But if you are trying to meet your graduation requirements, it's like, well, I can do world language where I could do this education program. And I know it's not either or, but it feels like we are neglecting that one.
Just one real quick, the continuous learner column, these 15 credits that are aligned to ICAP, et cetera, is there a listing of those courses?
So we have the beginnings of that, but I think that is, as I mentioned in the timeline, I think that is really, and I would say that the task force felt like that was important next steps.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of work to do with course codes and all of the courses that we currently offer. So, I mean, we didn't want to necessarily overwhelm with the thousands of courses in each bucket, but I think that that is work that the team would want to be intentional about.
I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to just advocate in terms of the special education needs of students. And so that increase to 8 for math could potentially have a significant impact on the ability of students with IEPs to be able to graduate in a timely manner. Students with disabilities earn a standard diploma. And so it's just important to keep that in mind, that typically in the math kind of trajectory, students with disabilities do much better in the more applied courses. So having the flexibility or greater flexibility in that math content would be a benefit to that population.
Okay, thanks for that feedback. And this is kind of where the balance is, what is academically required and how many of it is going to go under that continuous learning credits. In an ideal environment, we want all students to take rigorous classes all through their 4 years of education in District 11. And if they are demonstrating their learning skills, they are doing that in an academically rigorous class in that 4th year possibly. My concern is that when sometimes you are giving the choice to a 15 or a 16-year-old, they're going to take the path of least resistance, and they're going to take the easiest class that are going to be there just to earn the credits, irrespective of what the counselor input is going to be in there. And how would I know that? Because probably that's my 15 or 16-year-old going back. I would have done the same thing at that time. So that's where the balance is. How much of it should we as a school board require academically, and how much of it that we transfer over to the student and say, okay, take classes that is going to set you up for the future when you graduate. So that's the discussion in front of the board between Proposal A and Proposal B.
Or C. I'm putting C out there now.
Yeah, Proposal C, which is kind of in between Proposal A and Proposal B, which you talked about. Okay, first of all, is there any support for Proposal A at this point in time? What is in the... Okay, I see none for Proposal A. So Proposal B is what is proposed out there, and Proposal C was just relax the math requirements from 8 to 6.
Yeah.
Okay, so Proposal B is what is in there as now, and Proposal C is relax the math requirements alone, which comes under innovative problem solver from 8 to 6, so that required credits now will be 33, and the other side would be 17. Okay, so which one does the board want to go with? Proposal B, what's the support for proposal B at this time?
Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're saying C now is B with a more relaxed math requirement.
So math, yes, math would go to 6 instead of 8 right there, and then the other side would go from 15 to 17.
And then that would help the special ed kids.
Yeah.
The requirement of 6, but they could take more.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it aligns to what
So
it
that's
currently is
proposal
in
C.
math.
That's proposal C.
That's proposal C, and it's the same thing with social studies.
And the kids that wanna go to college, if they are at that certain level of math, that it doesn't mean they can't get into college necessarily if they don't do the 4 years that's on this. Like you said, there's lots of kids who are doing 3 years right now and they're still going to
four-year college.
which was me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why I'm willing to relax that one.
Jill,
Okay.
what I'd say is if you look at the second column, the right-hand column, continuous learner, that can be all kinds of classes. That can be math. You can take a bunch of math out of there. You can take a bunch of social studies out of there. That's what that column's about. Pathway.
Yeah, and ideally, that's what that is,
Yeah.
hopefully. And not,
We'll come forward with a measurement plan here
Yeah.
by the end of the year, so we can make sure we're getting good metrics and revisit again next year. There's an infinite number of options, but I'm really curious of the number of kids that are only taking 3 years of math and getting into top-tier colleges. Right, I would imagine that that's not what we're counseling against anymore. And so I think that we're gonna see a really clear line in where it is that we're still on what I would call college track of, we have many kids who are going to colleges that are literally done with their high school requirements by the end of their junior year. Particularly our Odyssey kids are often spending all of their senior year off campus at higher learning institutions while still in high school. So I think some of the things that we're worried about, or when we measure, we're gonna find are a very, very small minority of students while we increase both the engagement and opportunity for a larger set of students.
okay, Julie, you had final thoughts, so we got to move on.
Yes, just something like personal finance. Does that fall under a math class as well?
Not in this current model.
We haven't offered it in a way that it comes through math class. Are you still here, Principal Burke? Do you just wanna quickly summarize some of the challenges in getting folks to see the difference between econ and personal finance from that conversation I overheard last year?
Yeah, so I think personal finance, right, is about who you are as a person and how you manage money and how you do your finances, investments and taxes and that kind of stuff, where econ is really a much bigger picture of how do the economics of the world work, right, in a micro and a macro way. Personal financial literacy actually years ago fell under the Colorado academic standards in both social studies and math standards. And so we interwove them into Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, so to speak, in the math world, and they interwove them into different courses in the econ world. Part of, in my experience, part of what kind of credit you got depended on who was teaching it. So if a highly qualified math teacher was teaching it, you could get math credit. And if a highly qualified social studies teacher was teaching it, you could get social studies credit. I know that we also have things where teachers can actually teach out of their qualified area for a certain number of semesters. And so there's flexibility in that. So it really all just depends on how flexible we want to be with personal finance and what it can count as a credit for. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
I think for me, I lean toward B and going for the 8, especially if we can offer the flexibility of some of the classes with special project type classes and some of the career angled classes.
Okay.
Oriented classes.
So you need, Superintendent Gall and your team, you need feedback from the board as far as what we are leaning towards, proposal A or B at this time.
Or C.
Or C, that's fine. I didn't see any support for proposal A at this time, so tabling proposal A. Proposal B was with the 8 credits for math requirements. That's what was proposed by the district. And proposal C, which Director Nelson proposed, was just 6 credits for the math requirements and then opening up the other 2 credits in the ICAP pathway line. So first, since proposal B is what is at the table, what's the support for proposal B at this time? With, okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so then we stay with proposal B. We don't need to go to proposal C. Proposal
Thank
B.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, team.
So moving on to the next item on the agenda is employee handbook vision and goal setting. This is part of the discussion that took place a few weeks back. At that time, Director Carey facilitated a conversation with the board about the employee engagement group, setting some guardrails and expectations from the board level as that employee engagement group got that process started. Some questions were kind of left hanging out there and weren't answered. And as we have started the listening sessions with the community, and we've had 2 listening sessions, one at Mitchell and one at Palmer, some of the questions come back to what was discussed in that previous meeting and clear guidance from the board as far as what the next steps are. And Director Carey is again going to facilitate this conversation, and I will, I don't think I have anything else to add. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, President Malpacum. So I think the key phrase for me here is kind of clear direction from the board. You know, as we're kind of moving to this model where we're governing our entire staff through use of a handbook, which is again, you know, the way ESP and Exec Pro has done this, as far as I know, for the existence of D11, and how most districts in the state, you know, think about managing their staff. I think what we're trying to get to here is a place where the EEG and staff have kind of clear ideas as to what the expectations of the board are. So as a result of the last session, I had kind of a list that I sent to you all in an email of some unanswered questions and points for discussion. I think the place we really want to get to tonight is a series of clear taskers for staff, because a lot of what those questions are really operational in nature. You know, what is the specific procedure for incorporating employee feedback and input? That's not something we necessarily have to work out as a group of 7, but it is something that we need. So I think as I try to kind of walk through at least what to my mind are the major points of organization here, I think what I would ask you all to kind of keep in mind is the goal here is for us to be able to have a series of tasks for staff where we say, we expect the employee handbook to do this with these goals or these guardrails. Or we need you to come up with a plan for this for us to kind of give our okay to, and we need it on this timeline. That's kind of where I'm hoping that we can get to by the end of this conversation. And the other thing I would say here, and Nicole and Brandon, Mike has walked away. Nicole and Brandon are welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's not a need necessarily to reinvent the wheel for a lot of this stuff. You know, the ESP handbook and the executive professional handbook, those in the 2024-2025 agreement, they had already said, you know, we're okay kind of merging this into one document and figuring out what that looks like. We're not necessarily trying to make big changes to working conditions. In fact, that's one of the things that we said in our letter when we declined to renew the master agreement. We have no intention of changing working conditions. We have no intentions of changing procedures. We have no intentions of, you know, changing procedures for salary, leave, benefits. So the point that I want to make here again is we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but I do think we need to give staff and the EEG a clear set of tasks to be thinking about and a clear set of our own expectations for the boundaries under which they do the work. So with that in mind, I'm just going to jump into my own way of organizing it as best I can tell, thinking through all the issues. I'm going to try to take notes as we go. So the first topic to me that I want to just get the board's feeling on is the question of compensation this year. This has been a point of interest from the community for obvious reasons, right? I'm interested in that in my own job. And I know that there's a lot we still don't know about how the state legislative session is going to go and how much money we expect from the state. We had said earlier, I'm blanking on the exact time we said this, that, you know, our expectation is that all new money from the state is going to be oriented towards compensation in some capacity. So the first thing I want us to discuss is, number one, are we still good with that? Number two, are there any other stipulations or goals or guardrails for how we expect Dr. Comfort to handle that question? And then number three, with the understanding that there's still some uncertainty at the state level, what is our expectation for timeline? So with that, I'll just turn it over to all of you. Lauren.
I'll just say that I'm still stand by our decision at the end of October that we will direct any new monies towards compensation. And I would say that as soon as Dr. Comfort feels comfortable bringing proposals to the board as he has a better idea of what the State Finance Act is looking like, that he can bring that to us to evaluate exactly what the strategy will be across our staff. And that's normally how it's been done in the past as well. We have those conversations with the proposals and then we decide kind of which direction we want to go. So I would maintain that's how we'll continue.
I would agree with that.
Any other thoughts or things that you want to discuss as far as kind of questions of compensation this year?
I'll add one more thing. I don't know what the School Finance Act is going to bring. It could be a really lean year as far as the School Finance Act and the new money that we get into the district. So if one of the other things that I would throw out is the focus last year was direct that money as much as possible closest to the students in the classroom and emphasize instruction that aligns with our board priority out there. So if the new money that we are going to get from state is sparse and not enough to support a robust compensation package to our building staff, teaching staff especially, is there a possibility that you can, at the central administrative level, still look at inefficiencies and direct some of the money back to our schools and our classrooms?
I'm happy to respond really quickly, President Mountbatten. So yes, we don't know a lot about the School Finance Act yet. Ms. Atwood, I'm sure, will speak to that tonight. The big clarifying question is, are we going to go towards the agreed upon new school finance model or not? The position for District 11 varies pretty significantly in those two. We will fare better if we go towards the new school finance model. What I will say is we're not anticipating it being a great year regardless. I think we all know that. I feel completely comfortable saying that all new money from the state will go towards compensation as the board has directed in previous years. We've done well beyond what we've received in new money from the state in employee compensation, and the way that we did that was through efficiencies, as you named them, and so we are very prepared to do that again this year.
Okay, is the board comfortable with that?
Awesome.
Okay.
I just would add that we have not, for people who are looking for answers on compensation right now, to Director Nelson's point, it usually has come later because we are waiting for the Finance Act and we have never been able to finalize those. We've been able to have ballpark them maybe, but not finalized. So hopefully people have some patience with that because
This is just the
we don't have
timeline
the
it is.
answers.
Yeah.
Dr. Comfort, could you give us a ballpark on when you think a reasonable time to bring some first ideas to the board would be?
Yeah, and again, I'll lean on Ms. Atwood later this evening. Typically we receive school finance information by the second week of April, around there. I feel confident in saying that I can bring you guys some models that I think will be close by the time we get to spring break. I do know that people are waiting, and while I don't want to overestimate or overpromise and underdeliver, I do feel confident by spring break we'll at least be able to bring some communication to the board that will feel more comfortable where we're likely headed, barring any last second adjustments, which can happen in school finance, but I think everybody would then understand if the rug got pulled out from under us. So I think spring break is a reasonable timeline for myself to bring you some estimates as well as some different strategies on where we focus that compensation.
And as in all former years in D11, that conversation typically happens in an executive session just for the public that are watching. Like, this is just how it is handled. And then once we get more to a final point, we bring it out publicly. And we'll be able to bring like the preliminary budget development assumption out publicly with kind of where the budget is looking and the mismatch that we are looking at having. But the nitty-gritty detail of compensation packages, that we have to wait till we get our actual state school finance act information confirmed.
So President Malpacum, if you're okay with this, the way I would propose doing this is, as we kind of work through these ideas, I'm kind of taking notes on like task number 1, here it is, here are the details, and then we get board consensus. Does that sound like a reasonable thing to you? So let me just read you all that I have so far. So task number 1, all new money from the state will go to staff compensation. Some subpoints. Dr. Comfort is going to attempt to bring models around the time of spring break. Some of that will depend on the state, we get that. And then number 2, if the funding coming from the state is sparse, we're going to continue to try to make cuts at central admin, redirecting money as close to the classroom as we can, with the intention of providing robust compensation package for our staff. Are we okay with that?
As long as we aren't cutting out what we need at central admin, there's jobs that hold this place together, and that's a concern. We talk about cutting central admin all the time, and at some point you can't cut anymore. And I don't know if we're there yet, but it's gotta be tight in some
Well,
situations.
I mean, I'll leave that to the operational discretion of Superintendent Gall. He is going to figure out what is necessary at the central admin level to keep everything running smooth.
Yeah, we believe we can meet those objectives at least for another year. The organization has lost 1/3 of its student population over 20 years, and its overall staffing has increased during that time period. So we're making those corrections to, as we exit decrease in enrollment averaging, to be accountable to the dollars that the state gives us to educate children and to continue to do that in an excellent way.
Yeah, I would just say maybe it's more defined as efficiencies in the system and broaden it a little bit.
Thank you, Treasurer Nelson, for the language.
Okay. There's a number of other kind of questions, at least the way in my head it makes sense to group these is, the first one is, and we can do these in whatever order, but this is the next one that I was thinking of, kind of input from staff to operations more generally. So mechanisms for staff to provide feedback, for staff to provide input, are obviously very important to the community. They're very important for a good working environment. This encompasses lots of different things. This encompasses just, general feedback and input as to how we're doing. I think it encompasses procedures for fielding complaints. There was a request for, do we need a detailed procedure for whistleblowers? What is the specific remedy in the case of a breakdown between, the employee and their direct supervisor? There was an example that we were given over email that's been much in my mind of, okay, we keep saying, just go to your chain of command, go to your immediate supervisor. What if you're a probationary teacher and you're in fear for your job and that's not something you're comfortable with? Do we have other avenues for them? So again, some of this, is already laid out in the different handbooks themselves. We don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel here. But again, I do think, can we kind of frame a task for staff to say, here is our expectation, here are the goals, here are the guardrails under which you're thinking about this as you're trying to kind of get everything squared away with the employee, with the EEG. So that's kind of the next thing I want to open the floor for discussion on.
And that's a question that often comes up in the listening session. It's been a subject of conversation where staff end up asking if there is going to be certain breakdown in communication or breakdown in the way things are tasked to them from building principal level. They are being asked to do things that are outside the scope of even what's defined in the employee handbook. We heard some of that discussion out here about PLCs and plan time and all those kind of things. Is there a pathway that we can provide clearly where staff feel comfortable, whether that is through your department, human resources? But that's the task that Director Carey says.
Director Nelson.
I would just say we task staff, say, hey, you guys come up with some ideas of how you think you wanna handle what was just shared. And then come back to us with what, I mean, it's operational, so I don't know, it's really our decision, but just so that we can understand something will be in place and then we can help communicate that out.
I guess my question would be like, as a board, do we have any other stipulations where we want to tell staff, by the way, as you're thinking through this, here are some things we would like you to be thinking of, or here are some ways in particular we want you to try to solve this problem? Director Jorgensen?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned already, on the paths for staff to have just general feedback and input, but I mean, like, we're seeing, for instance, the PLC and the plan time is still in my mind. You know, we don't want anybody to look bad or have a lack of transparency by, well, the board said this, but it's still happening here, but my principal is the one who's telling me, and just like, okay, well, who's telling the truth then, right? And we don't wanna make anybody look like fools. So how do we have that consistency if it's as the board we're saying teachers get their plan time, PLC needs to be figured out, and that's that, to go all the way through Mike, all the way through his team down to the principal. So I think we have to have something along the lines of, we got an email today, right? My principal and my area soup, you know, aren't aligning with what was talked about at the board meeting. And it's like, okay, we gotta solve stuff like that. So if it's that fielding complaints, I had mentioned a whistleblower policy a couple years ago. Maybe that's part of something. I never don't want another policy, but maybe there is something where we go, I've talked to principal, I've talked to area soup. I need to bring it directly to the board to make it their awareness without impunity. So I think those three pathways sound good to me so far on what to build operations around. Just general feedback and input, like, hey, we thought about doing this, you know? Fielding complaints, just in general natures, and that might be like an HR one. And then a whistleblower might be a policy plus a procedure, for really egregious things that you're just like, you need to tell somebody, right? Who's people are gonna make the decisions that are gonna try to fix it through, then their one employee would be the board.
I actually don't know. Do we have a board policy for whistleblower procedures? Is that the kind of thing that would be board policy, or would that be outlined in the handbook? I actually don't know.
It was at policy committee like a couple of years ago, and then there was some things happening at the state level that we kind of had to wait, if I remember correctly. Am I speaking correct? Chime in here.
Well, it was presented as a draft policy, but it never made it out of committee.
Because there is state law that covers people.
So
I think it was more about the policy where they went to the media or something like that, if I remember right. Did I get that wrong? I mean, it was more about you need to go through the proper channels within the district itself, as opposed to going outside district channels and going to the media. That's how I remember it. Maybe I'm conflating things.
There was a portion that was written in there that you were protected if you went outside of district channels.
Okay.
If you had exhausted all of the different district channels.
So there is no policy.
There is
no whistleblower policy.
So I guess the question is there a need, or is it that it's covered at state level and we just need to work that into operations, HR procedures? So you guys can tell us.
You can look into that.
I think we could certainly offer part of the employee engagement or the employee handbook, a process that says, if these conditions that are described here have not been met, here is a place where this goes to. Instead of creating an alternative pathway, what we're talking about is where we will be defining planning time, and where the other things that our staff are worried about is in the employee handbook, that then there's a chapter or a section that says, if you feel that you are in, or that your staff or your supervisor is in violation of this, this is the process for that to come.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did.
So I don't know if that needs to come. You can get feedback from the employee engagement group as part of the process, I guess, as to how that feedback looks like. Because it goes in the employee handbook eventually.
Are there other points of discussion here? Otherwise, I can read what I have so far. Director Haeflin.
This is a different topic. Are you are you still talking about the same thing, or are you asking for new topics?
I have I think two other topics. What do you want to talk about, and I'll tell you if that's on my list.
What guarantee does staff have that this, what they're calling a living document, won't change mid-year or at the whim of administration?
So the next thing that I want to talk about is input kind of to the handbook at a meta level. So how do you make suggestions to the handbook? At what timeline is the handbook revised? I think that would fall under that.
Yep.
So is that okay? Is that okay if we table that for now?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions on just operational input and feedback or any other topics? Okay, can I read what I have so far then? So I have develop a robust procedure for staff input and feedback to include procedures for a breakdown in communications between an employee and their direct supervisor with reference to state level protocol as needed. Procedures for fielding complaints or grievances, and again, a lot of this exists already in the handbooks. There are grievance procedures in those handbooks. And then just procedures for operational suggestions and input. If you have ideas as to, I think, as a district, we could pivot to doing this, or what if we did this at my school? What's the expectation for how that is done? Does that sound good? Does anyone have anything to add?
Less is more, that's good, sounds good.
Well, and I think on the website, we have a financial and propriety section as well that was aimed at like whistleblowing, but misuse of resources. So we could reference that.
Alleging that someone else in the system has misused resource, or, okay. I will write that in as well.
Because, and part of it, I appreciate the idea behind communication breakdown and where people can go if that issue is not getting addressed. Because certainly that exists in probably every business, and things need to be addressed so people can do their job without harassment and fear.
Do we want to get thumbs on what I have for this one?
Go ahead.
Are we good with this? Okay. Third broad category I want to talk about, and this will get back to Director Safely point, is just input and feedback for the handbook itself. So this encompasses a lot of different things. The previous meet and confer process for ESP and Exec Pros is essentially getting inputs and discussion around how to revamp the handbook in future years. So when you go back and you look at the language of the 2023-2024 handbook for ESP and Exec Pros, what it says is the board and the superintendent can modify this handbook after discussion with the team. So this would encompass questions like, what is the expectation now for considering changes to the handbook? What is the timeline under which this occurs? That was something that you polled in all the list. We've only done 2 of the listening sessions. I don't know if we have initial data on that or not.
Annually was the highest.
Annually was the highest one. And then what was the thing that you said earlier, Director Haefele?
What guarantee does staff have that this living document won't change mid-year or at the whim of administration?
So what is the protocol for, ensuring that changes are not made outside of the normal system, or do we need a protocol of that nature? So that's kind of the next place I want to take this. So again, I would open it up for just discussion on all of that.
I keep going first, but I think that's where, to Director Haefele's point, or question, the board is going to have to take a look at policy and with the support of staff, what's the series, G series, is that our?
It's G.
Personnel, policies, we, probably need to review or at least compare the new handbook to policy and make sure we're covering all our bases, and I think the guardrail is the policy of if administration wants to make a change in operations and it's within policy, I don't know, shouldn't that be okay? Like, shouldn't there be that ability for leadership to make changes if for the betterment of the system?
Not on a whim.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, are you saying whenever they want?
Yeah, no.
Can you give me an example, like?
Well, I think I'd give you an example that I don't know how either the master of the agreement or the employee handbook would have handled Jenkins. There's no time for us to convene a listening group to understand how we came up with a $300 a month stipend for dislocated staff, and then other capital opportunities for the two schools that absorb that. So I think there's got to be something in there that says, unless under emergency situations or as approved by the board for the superintendent or administration to make that change.
Yeah.
I think the idea of trying to cover everything, we just lived through an example.
Right.
We lived through an example that said, we made the best decisions on behalf of students, families, and staff. And I'm certain that there are students, families, and staff that don't think we made the overall best decision.
I would also add, I definitely hear the fear, potential in the question. I think the other side of that is the inability of the system to be flexible, which we have now to some degree. We just approved an MOU to address something on the salary schedule that had never been addressed. And there would have been, without that flexibility, there would have been a group of people that we would have said, sorry, we don't do this until next year, right? And actually, in all honesty, that's a lot easier on us, right? If that handbook doesn't change all year long, that's a lot easier. But at least in my experience, all of those adjustments through MOU have been to the benefit of staff. We've never gone to an MOU that somehow removed some level of protection. It's all been because somebody said something's not right there. And we said that can't wait until next year's discussion. And so I think that there is a place for that to ensure that the system is not changing at a whim, but is being responsive to the needs of the system.
Quick clarifying question. I don't know who has the most institutional longevity here. ESP and Exec Pros have been on the handbook model for the history of D11. Have there ever been cases where someone has tried to change the handbook in the middle of the year, whether that was the superintendent or the will of the board? How often has that happened in reality, where we've said, we're gonna make this change, right now, whether you like it or not? Is that a thing that's happened?
Usually it takes place through the MOUs that what Dr. Comfort is talking about. And then at the end of the year, if that MOU is applicable going forth, then it gets incorporated into the handbook. Correct me if I'm...
No, that's correct. I don't want to say it's never happened. I've never been aware of anything like that, Director Carey, where...
And going back to the question that Director Hafley asked, I think this is the concern coming from staff more so, and probably it is driven out of fear as opposed to anything else at this point in time, that the master agreement was legally binding, and if anything needed to be changed in the master agreement, usually it has to go through that process that takes place in the springtime IBB. But now, without that protection, would the board be removing things, or the administration would be removing things that would detrimentally impact our staff in terms of some of their salary or benefits? I think that's what driving the question, that we don't at a whim take away something that has been guaranteed 2 months into it. Oh, we are going to take away your sick time or whatever it is. I think that's more the fear that is driving it as opposed to anything else. At least that's my perception out there.
I mean, consider the fact that we vote on the calendar once, and then after that, it's set. So what I'm hearing is that people don't want to be to put their time and effort and their trust into a system that can change on them whenever somebody feels like it, and yet and it's not a small thing, but in relation to the employee handbook, things like the calendar, set in stone once it's voted on. Yet the employee handbook could be changed, and there's fear around that, and we certainly don't want that.
So at the sorry, Lauren.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, at the moment, the language that the two handbooks have is the board, I'm not gonna quote it exactly, but it's the board and the superintendent can change the handbook after discussion with, in this case, the meet and confer team. I don't know if the, EEG is kind of de facto taking the place of meet and confer teams. Meet and confer teams actually are not defined in the employee handbook, which I find a little strange. So would the board be comfortable with retaining, language like that? Handbook is changed after discussion with, and then, whatever stipulations the board thinks is appropriate to put on that.
I need more definition, like you're saying.
So at the moment, in the current employee handbooks, the way it's set up is the only time the handbook is subject to change, the only time the board and the superintendent change things in the employee handbooks is after discussion with the meet and confer teams. The meet and confer teams, that's not defined in the handbook. Historically, it's been the head of the organizations plus, I don't know, who else is usually at that, in those conversations?
There's a team out there for ESP and exec pros.
So my question is, would the board be comfortable basically continuing that and saying, here is the handbook. We're not gonna change the handbook until there is discussion with whatever the solution we wanna have going forward.
Right, there's gotta be some accountability.
Well, and that's where I was gonna go. I think that's our job, like the checks and balances of the system is the board over administration. So if administration starts at a whim changing things, we're gonna hear about it. And then we'll go to them and say, what are you guys doing? And so we're the ones that have to hold them accountable. And then I guess I would just pose, what if we look at other districts' handbooks and see, is there, like, this has already had to have been figured out, like, what do other district handbooks say about edits to a handbook and how is that handled and what approvals need to happen? So I'm just thinking in terms of like other industries.
Jen, do you have anything to share from your other experiences in the work you've been mining in between puffs?
Yes, there's a few districts where sorry, I'm having a swallowing problem today. Where it's handled, just the HR department is over the employee handbook, and so there's a system of, of making sure that the superintendent is aware in those pieces. This is the first district I've been in where the board is gonna be over the employee handbook per se, but I think
I don't think that's right. We're over policy.
Right. So I do believe though that it makes sense if the board is now gonna be over the employee handbook, that if there would be the checks and balances in regards to the flows through the EEG and then it goes to the board for approval. That makes sense to me. But in other districts, it's just an operational piece the employee handbook is, and when there's a change made, it's just done in red on the employee handbook so people know that that was done.
That's what I think it should be. The board should not be involved in this document. This is an operations document. We are over policy. The fact that we are talking about the handbook, I think, is because it's a new thing and the contract with the master agreement was between the board and there was a lot of operational stuff in that contract. So now we're trying to roll it into a new document and I personally don't see that this is a space the board should really be owning. When I said that we hold accountable, it's more of we hold staff accountable. We're not owning or overseeing the handbook itself. So if staff start making edits that are crazy to the handbook, then we hold them accountable, is my thought. So
And
more of what you described.
The edits that are done in other districts that I've worked in are really done to make communication more clearer and transparent in the handbook. Never to a detriment to the employee, but always just to make it more clear and transparent and beneficial to the employees.
Good.
To Director Nelson's point, and yours with the calendar, who is responsible for this handbook? And is it us or is it HR? I mean, I don't feel like we ever really decided. And I still have the exact same question, like, are we voting on this and we're determining? And yeah, it's problematic.
We oversee policy, this is an operations document. That's my take. So I don't know if we need to take thumbs to agree to that or not.
I guess I would, at least this is just my own opinion, I'd kind of go back to what you said earlier, which is I think the board is taking a more active role here because this is a time of transition and we're trying to kind of, in our own way as elected officials, provide some oversight over the process. I guess my question would be, how do you, again, to my original point of I want to phrase all of this as tasks to the team, where do you want, how do we want to come down on the question of, okay, so then what are the procedures for handbook revision? Is that something staff /HR do unilaterally? Do we have the expectation that they consult with staff in some capacity? Do we have any guardrails around that? Or do we say, bring us some proposals? This is an operational question. Why don't you do some research yourself, look into neighboring districts and bring us some ideas for how this is normally done and how you want to do it. And then we as a board can give you the thumbs up that that's an okay solution as far as we're concerned.
Yes, please.
I think that's a better way to do it.
Piecemeal is kind of strange. As far as I'm concerned, we gave you guidance, you should go write the whole thing with your EEG and input, and then bring it back and put it out there in the world and get more input, see what we forgot, what you missed, what we missed, and then we go from there. You're the experts.
Two's in. We love that. We're ready.
Yeah, I think we'll just need time to do that, right? And some of these other potential questions might remain unanswered until we do that. Which I think I would just ask for the board's patience in that. Because right now we're kind of responding to concerns, which is fair, instead of creating the handbook and then seeing if the handbook responds to those fears.
Yeah, okay.
So if we can bring a draft, I think then to Director Ott's point, we know what we missed and what we didn't, and the board can give really clear direction on, oh, you missed that, or take that out. But we're still in kind of the very early stages of creation.
And you are hearing, when we're having our listening session, and you're hearing what the concerns are. So hopefully you're addressing them as you create.
Yeah, I really do feel, I apologize for interrupting, Director Ott. I really do feel that most of anybody's concerns are going to be addressed when we see a draft and people see how consistent that draft is. It doesn't mean that there's not still going to be some feedback or that we haven't missed something, but you have experts as well as a really strong EEG team that is committed to the cause, and so we're gonna bring you a great document, and then we look forward to making it better after you see it.
So did we reach an agreement that the board does not own this document, and we just make sure the document aligns to policy?
Yeah.
Like, are we all in agreement with that, so we can settle that question?
We can get thumbs on that if you want in a moment. Here's what I have right now for at least the question of handbook revision. What I have is the handbook must contain a mechanism for handbook revision. But then I say this is entirely operational, bring us a proposal based on, comparison to surrounding districts. We'll go from there. Are we okay with that?
Yes.
We happy with that? Okay. And then do we want to get?
Do you need a thumbs up on that? We got a thumbs up? Okay.
Yeah, and then President Melpacum, do we feel the need to get consensus on that question of this is an operational document, this is not board ownership? I don't know if that's the thing we need thumbs for or not. I'm gonna punt it back to you as president.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's the direction of the board at this time.
We've all kind of said that
Yeah.
in one way or another through this feedback, so I think just thumbs to solidify it's fine.
Sure.
Julie was asking, so I just thought, let's solidify it.
Okay, thumbs up on the question that was posed, that does. Okay. You have. Okay.
Okay, so this is what I have for that then. Note, this is an operational document. The board does not have ownership of the handbook per se. We are taking a more active role in this time of transition. Are we comfortable with that? Okay. Those were the main organizational things that I had. Is there anything that I missed? Is there anything else that you want to talk about kind of related to the question of handbook development? I could just open up the floor to anything that you feel like we didn't cover.
What is the timeline?
Great
We would see
question.
a draft.
What's the earliest time? Because I think there's a lot of, understandably, staff interest in the details here.
Right.
What do you think the earliest time you can get us a draft is?
I think I committed to before spring break for compensation. We'll stick with the same for the handbook development. I think that'll really focus our work. It will get us really busy, but I think we can bring you a quality draft in that whatever board work session or whatever comes before the spring break.
And that aligns with April for when we really get heavy into hiring season for folks to understand what are the conditions of which we're asking them to work. although the board has said not different than they were last year, but I know people want to see that in writing. It's not in our benefit to hide anything here, to lose teachers in June for next year. So the earlier the better, and I know that we have the right team in place with the EEG to get it coming to you all.
You may have to have extra EEG meetings probably between.
Or we'll move one, we have one, so yeah,
yeah.
we'll do some rescheduling,
Yeah.
we can do that.
One thing that's still left undecided that Director Nelson and I ran into at our listening session was the status of meet and confer and this spring. So and to me, it's an efficiency question. If that is something that has always been done by administration, and we give thumbs up and thumbs down on various decisions and give guidance, and then have the final handbook. There is no future handbook in that format. So I'm curious what your plan is, or if you are expecting guidance from us and we haven't given it because it hasn't been given a direction the way the board decided for the master agreement. So if our employees are thinking that meet and confer is going to happen this spring and they're working on their issues, or they're working on discussing what they're going to discuss with you, it's a waste of their time completely if we, admin and board, are not gonna honor that. So what is our stance on that?
I'll share maybe where I'm coming from, just for the efficiency's sake. Yeah, if we're building this document and we're still having meet and confers on an old handbook that's now gonna be into one new handbook, then there would be a redundancy or lack of efficiency. So I think in an effort to move to this one document and the admin tasks that you talk about to go do all the meet and confers, I think you should not do them and allow this process to run its course. You're gonna have the ESP and the Exec Pro and then certified staff getting their sections in there. And then we have those groups represented in our EEG. So if I were an ESP and I would go with what I'm proposing right now is not having me confer, to say, okay, I'm ESP, that person's on the EEG, I'm gonna email them with what I think. I think that way you've got the chance for them not to be having to juggle meet and confers over here while trying to build the handbook over here. So that'd be what I would recommend. If we're not doing negotiations, and we have a handbook, then we pause meet and confer.
I guess my question is, there's a weird sense in which it almost feels redundant to me that, meet and confer is largely about suggestions, revisions, inputs to handbook language. That's part of what the EEG is doing in this process of compilation. If you take a look at who's on the EEG, it's a lot of the same people who would be in meet and confer. So my question would be, can those conversations of, hey, what about this X, Y, and Z, as revisions, can some of that occur over the course of the EEG meetings?
I think that we'll get there, because there's gonna be those different groups informing the creation of the overall handbook. It might be one of the things that happens after we bring our initial draft, right? Hopefully we were able to embody most of that in the original draft, and we might have to go and do a little bit of work individual to the subsections to each employee group. But I agree that I'm not sure how we would be creating a unifying handbook at the same time taking edits on a pre-existing handbook, because all of that is the same thing.
That's gonna go away.
And so that would be my potential suggestion is, yes, we're welcome, we're happy to engage those groups. I think that's gonna be an overall question even post-handbook is, what do we do for all staff and then what do we do for each employee group, right? I know we have to address that.
Yeah.
And so we will start on how we're building this handbook by here's the unifying document, and we know we need to have some of those specific conversations where it's not complete alignment between the employee groups. So I think we can handle that in the EEG. And maybe we would hold some separate extension meetings with specific groups. I think we can manage that. outside of having to do a separate meet and confer process.
So can I repeat this back to you just to make sure I'm understanding the suggestion? So the suggestion is in between now and spring break, the EEG's primary focus is on getting a complete handbook developed. After that draft is a good time for people to say, all right, we have the draft, the board's taken a look at it. In the meantime, what are your suggested revisions? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, now maybe we show up to the next EEG meeting with a draft and everybody's like, this is perfect, and then we can start having those conversations right then. I doubt that's going to be the case. So yes, I think our primary task right now is bringing you the comprehensive document to see if we're on track or if we're completely missing the mark. Because if we're missing the mark, we got a whole lot of work to do that isn't employee group specific. Assuming we are on track, then I think we can have some of those engagement conversations to make sure we're addressing some of those detailed things to each employee group so that we're hitting both pieces.
So is the board comfortable with that in kind of the short term? Short term, the primary task of staff in the EEG is to get the complete document to the board in order for us to kind of have some oversight as to the direction. After that is a good time for a process of kind of suggested revisions. And one of the things that's going to be in the handbook is some kind of proposal for the mechanism for revision itself. And then in future years, whatever operations decides as the mechanism for revision, that'll be a task for you.
Yeah, I mean, we've already said there's a task for them to figure out voice and how to get feedback and input, and that's around all kinds of things in the system, but also any potential future revisions to a handbook. And so just knowing that that's also going to be figured out, I'm very comfortable with calling for a vote on we will not be doing meet and confer this year because it just doesn't make sense at this time. Call the vote.
I'm gonna let Parth do that. I'm trying to type this up.
Well, is there any other feedback from anybody else that want to chime in on this subject before we can ask for a thumbs up on this? Okay, well then, you were very good at summarizing things, but let me take on that role now as best as I can. From what I hear is that in lieu of the meet and confer process, we will go through the same this year it's going to be the employee handbook that is going to be developed over the next couple of months, next month especially, but in future years, EEG would be the space in which revisions to that employee handbook would take place, and that would be the group that would provide input and feedback into the revision of the employee handbook. Did I summarize that okay? Is that?
Are you saying just for the spring or for the future?
Well, I think for the future, they're going to come up with a proposal operationally for what the revision mechanism is.
Okay.
I think in the short term, the EEG is a great vehicle for that.
Perfect. Okay, so let's put the pause on the future part of it. For right now, the employee engagement group is going to be the space of the group through which that employee handbook is going to be developed, as opposed to having the meet and confer process, which could potentially be work that is being duplicated in the meet and confer process as well. Okay, so.
I'm comfortable with that as long as the employee groups have their say in terms of getting back to you all with their suggestions and consideration.
Well, they are represented in the employee engagement group. Now, the meet and confer group used to be a much larger group, but for example, ESP has created their own ESP relations group, which has representation from each one of their departments, the 9 branches. What's that?
Job families.
Job families, thank you. 9 different job families that are there. And so that ESP relations group can provide the feedback to the representatives that sit on the EEG. And every employee group can choose to do the same thing at their local level as opposed to. Okay. Great, so For this spring, again, taking a thumbs up on what was already suggested, okay? Okay,
Honestly, that's all I had.
okay. Is there anything else that is, since Chief Otmer and Deputy Superintendent, now I got your title right, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Comfort, that's a lot of titles out there, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Comfort.
I'll send an email out about this, but do you want me to just summarize the tasks real quick that we came up
Yes,
with?
you can, but is there anything that we haven't discussed that, okay, go ahead.
So I'll send this to the whole board and I'll send this to staff too. So number one, compensation task. All new money from the state goes towards staff compensation. You'll bring us some models and suggestions around the time of spring break. If it turns out to be the case that funding is sparse, as best you can, Director Ott had the great point, if you can't just cut central admin forever, but as best you can, let's see if we can find some ways to continue to redirect money as close to the classroom in order that staff get a robust compensation package. Staff number two, as you're working on the handbook with the EEG, you need to develop a robust procedure for staff input and feedback. You need to include procedures for breakdowns in communications between employees and their direct supervisors, reference state level protocol as required, procedures for complaints and grievances. Some of this is in handbooks already, so no need to reinvent the wheel. Procedures for just operational suggestions and input. Task number three, the handbook must contain a mechanism for revision of the handbook. We also note that the handbook itself is an operational document, but in this time of transition, we're kind of going to be managing the transition to the handbook. And then finally, your task is a complete draft by spring break. Okay, I'm good. That's all I have.
Okay.
Good luck, team.
And thank you. Appreciate you facilitating this conversation and getting us through this. And we look forward to some of the discussions. And we have two more listening sessions, one at Coronado on February 24th and one in early March at Doherty. So we look forward to engaging with our community at both those listening sessions as well. The next, Ms. Atwood, please join us. The next item on the agenda is legislative agenda and update. This was something that the board requested at the last meeting, and I was able to connect with Ms. Atwood, and she was available to meet with the board today. She is going to provide an update to the board on what is transpiring at the legislature level at this time, and also the board usually adopts a legislative agenda. And Ms. Olson, if you can pull up the document that is attached to board docs, which says legislative agenda.pdf. In the meantime, if the board wants to revise any other language in this document, this is our legislative agenda, or what we advocate for. But welcome, Ms. Atwood. I'm sure you are busy. It's good to see you. And I'll turn it over to you. So that's the legislative agenda that the board, as usually, and if you go to the second page, yeah, we go into some of the specific bullet points out there. This was something that this board actually adopted last year. So we haven't had a change in the board since last year. So if the board is comfortable with all the language that is in there, then we can leave it as such. If the board thinks that based on the current conditions, the current environment, we need to specifically add some new language or revise some other language that isn't there, we are open for that as well. So take a look at that, and I can come to it at the very end of this discussion. In the meantime, I will turn it over to Ms. Atwood to give us an update on what's happening at the.
It only took an hour and 45 minutes, so from the Capitol. So I was pleased with that. So tonight, I'll talk about school finance, where things are with that, what we're hearing federally with the Trump administration, and also go through if there are any bills that you have questions on, and some bills that I can discuss with you as well. So, school finance. Let's first start with the state budget. So the state budget, we had a briefing today, or JBC, Joint Budget Committee, had a briefing today that again said if they just hold current obligations, so if they hold 24-25 obligations plus inflation, enrollment, and caseload, Medicaid caseload into next year, they're $1 billion in the hole. That's not adding anything. That is inflation for us. Have to do that because, you know, that was a ballot measure. So everything is being looked at to be cut. And that includes K-12. The two big, the top two kind of pieces of the entire state budget pie are Medicaid and K-12 education. Medicaid overtook K-12 in the 24-25 budget. So, and that caseload just continues to grow. So there are big pressures on the state budget. It's unprecedented. The Joint Budget Committee 2 to 3, it might be 3 weeks ago, this Friday, sent a letter to all of the state departments and legislators saying, if you have money, please don't spend it. Don't spend down your fund balance thinking that you will get funded at that level for next year, which can happen towards the end of the year. Got to spend it so we get to keep it. They said, please don't spend it. And if you have positions that haven't been filled, please don't fill them. So, and that JBC has never done that. And they mentioned it again today that they have never sent a letter like that. So that puts into play then what gets cut in K-12. There are discussions about moving averaging from, we're currently on 5-year averaging, student averaging with the current school finance formula. The new formula moved it to 4-year averaging. And the governor would like to move it to 0, to current year. We have, Dr. Comfort and I have spoken, and that moving the averaging wouldn't be a big hit to the district because you've done so much with your declining enrollment. For other districts, that is huge. I think we will, either direction, whichever formula we go with, averaging is on the table. I think going to 3 years is probably pretty likely, but again, it may not be as big of an impact down here. Grant funding, if it's not READ Act, then it likely is going away. That is a place where they can pull anywhere between $50 and $70 million out of K-12 just without funding grants. One grant that is protected specifically would be the READ Act. That is one that's been protected all throughout the years, is that grant funding. That is also, every district receives money from READ Act, where other grants are district specific and not across the board. Healthy Meals for All, I think, is a place that it has been talked about since it passed on the ballot. It is a lot of money. And it's not being utilized at the high school level like it is at elementary and middle school. So there's discussions that is possibly a place that they pull back is high school. And maybe it isn't across the board all high school, but those districts with high free and reduced lunch, that also overlay high usage of the lunch program, that they may still get some funding. So, but there are just districts that are getting money and the kids just aren't utilizing it. But it is heavily used at elementary and middle school. Okay, let's talk about new formula versus current formula. The district benefits hands down with the new formula. So if the new formula goes into place for 25-26, the district absolutely benefits. That's why you took such a strong position of support on the bill, as well as it being in your policy agenda, it also economically supports or helps the district. There are triggers that were put into the bill that, think of it as a light switch, that turns the light off so that that bill won't get put into place for next year. So it's not like turning it on, it's actually their stop measures. We won't know if those stop measures are triggered until after March 20th. And March 20th, and you just had this discussion about knowing what school finance, where we are with money. March 20th is a key date because that is the date by which the revenue forecasts come out. And Joint Budget Committee usually takes 24, 48, 72 hours. Usually it's 24 hours. I mean, they take the budget, the revenue forecast that has the most money in it. And that is what all the numbers are built on. They've already put placeholders in up to March 20th. But if things need to be adjusted, they're adjusted after March 20th. And then the budget usually is introduced then the last week of March. And then it takes 2 weeks, last week of March, and then it moves into the next chamber the first week of April. Because there are going to be so many big decisions that have to be made. I can see that we don't see the budget until April 1st. And that's where, once we see that budget, we will know what at least is budgeted for K-12. How it gets spent is the School Finance Act that likely will come after the budget. It has come before the budget before, but I don't see us knowing even which formula to go with until after the budget has passed, which could be, I mean, depending on how rough it is. I mean, it could be up to May 1st. I would say probably April 15th. Because the Joint Budget Committee has really laid the groundwork that everything's getting cut. But we'll see, because there's a lot of jockeying. So when it comes to your negotiations, when it comes to putting together your budget, I think we'll have a pretty good idea, like Dr. Comfort said, with spring break. But that March 20th, I think, falls within your spring break. So, that really is a trigger. And it's unfortunate that everything is so tight that we have to wait for those March numbers. Every year we have to wait for the March numbers. But because the September forecast was so bad, the December forecast wasn't quite as bad. They're hoping the March forecast isn't, again, quite as bad. That just means instead of 750 million in the hole, they're just 500 to 750.
That's all.
That's all. And that's just current. That's not anything changing. So bills with this, okay, are there any questions on that?
You're just so cheerful.
I know.
Such the
I
bearer
say
of
it with a
such-
smile, though.
Yeah.
Well, do you,
Yeah. And my question is, do you have any good news?
well, do you want some generalities now before you go into specific bills?
Yeah, if you have comments specifically on the budget, great, let's do that now, and then we can move into bills.
Sure, I'll speak if I just for a moment. I mean, this is pretty evident that the chickens have come home to roost. And we have a deep blue legislature. We have COVID spending that the state had that's now gone. We have multiple expanded pet projects that we've been financing over the last few years. We've killed oil and gas, so there's no revenue from those great industries other than in Weld County. And we're just now living all of these bad decisions that have now finally become here at $1 billion a year. And then we're gonna say, cut education? I mean, it's usually that other side that says, fund education. But you can't make this stuff up. And I'll just stop there because I'll just diatribe longer, but this is gonna be a rough year. And they're gonna own it.
I know if the state were out from under Tabor, we might, some of the parts of Tabor anyway, that might help.
Tabor protects taxpayers just like DOJ is protecting people at the federal level.
Oh, okay. All right. Back to.
Are we opening up for questions at this time?
On
Is
the
that-
budget.
Just on the
Okay.
budget.
Is there any talk about returning the budget stabilization factor or anything like that?
So there is, and the education stakeholder community would like the cut to be put into a budget stabilization factor because it can be quantified. And we can go back every year, this is how much, this is how much, this is how much. Changing averaging gets lost in the weeds. That isn't a line item right there. So, and there is discussion, you know, Joint Budget Committee does not want a budget stabilization factor. They do not want it called that. They would like for it to be, if there are cuts, shown in the specific line items where those cuts are coming from. But averaging is difficult because you're just changing averaging, it's not a cut.
Any other questions on the budget?
I'd love to give just Dr. Comfort to kind of talk a little bit about how we're at a decrease in enrollment averaging and how we positioned ourselves for this, would you say it, the chickens come to roost?
Yeah.
Right, and that although there is a lot of gloom and doom in the SFA, we are well positioned as a district to stay on strategy, thanks to the forward thinking of our treasurer and our CRO, now deputy superintendent, and the rest of the board. Brandon?
And there was a talk a little while, a year or two back, about how our strategy was coming out of declining enrollment averaging, which was adopting the portfolio model. And now it looks like, in retrospect, we made the right call at the right time.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to expand on what Superintendent Gall said, the board made the exact right call at the right time. Because believe me, my fellow CFOs who are now dealing with declining enrollment averaging for the first time are now where our district was, which is like, we need that money. We are positioned, we didn't know it was gonna be this bad, but we knew that the averaging continued to be on the table. Every single year it was threatened, and at some point that's gonna happen. And so the portfolio approach did allow us to get out of that. And so now, not to say it won't be negative for other school districts, but if they get rid of it completely, District 11 is not impacted by that. And so we took that hit as we came out of ESSER. We really strategically managed our budget last year coming into this year. And so to what Superintendent Gall said, we are prepared to continue with the strategy of the district, understanding we would always love more money from the state. And we hope that the financial forecast in March is better, because that makes the things that we talked about earlier easier. But it won't change our strategy. We will continue to focus on a competitive compensation package for staff well beyond what we're going to get from the state, because I'm not preparing to get a lot from the state.
If anything at all.
Yep.
You may not get anything from the state.
But we're gonna be good.
And this speaks to, we hear staff when they say they want recurring compensation, but we don't know what we're gonna get, and that's why the non-recurring bucket of compensation has been what we have been using over the last couple of years to help give that compensation package, and it will likely play a large part this year as well.
It will, yeah. And again, well, we won't know all of the school finance act information by early March. We are already running concurrent models on this finance formula versus this finance formula. And so we'll have some level of projection that we can have a compensation conversation. We will get really firm and tight on what our non-recurring resources are, so the board will understand the position that they have. And in all fairness, yes, we don't know our recurring thing. We've been manufacturing our recurring salary increases over the last couple of years with strategic efficiencies and reductions. And so again, as at the direction of the board tonight, we will continue to do that to the level that's reasonable and attainable. But we're prepared for this. You know, we're not coming from a place where we've been getting millions and millions and millions of dollars. Last year, we got $2.8 million from the state. We gave almost 300% of that in recurring compensation alone, not to mention anything else. So we're ready to handle any budget we get from the state.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, so that's time for the board, back to you.
Okay. I wanted to touch on the federal administration and what we're hearing there. Not much, nothing concrete yet. And how it will impact education, we don't know. The state has joined other states in varying lawsuits to push back against those executive orders. Governor Polis and the Attorney General are very much out in front of those discussions. There was a press release from the governor that came out Monday that said there is a huge tranche of money that the state gets from the feds, and that, just knocking that out at the knees, it's not okay. And so he is fighting back to protect those dollars. And if you think some of those dollars are Medicaid reimbursements, title money, the money that we get in sped money from that. So he is certainly pushing back and is nationally having recognition for that, and has the AG, they're working together on that. There is, I want to say there is a certain level of panic. It has moved into that this week, but there isn't anything specific. So there's a lot of time being spent talking about it, but we don't have anything tangible to really bring it down. There have been discussions that if something happens after the legislature finishes, because remember, we have a hard stop, May 7th, that we could come back in special session. But we don't have money. So, if that happens, that means other things are on the table. It's not just like the property tax, where we could really just deal with property tax. It opens up, if it deals with money, it opens up the entire budget again. So there's a lot of anxiety about that. This rolls into bills, because bills that have a fiscal note will have a very hard time passing. And when we look at the accountability bill, which we've been a part of the task force, we've given comments back, we've been a part of the whole thing. There are 30 recommendations that bill should be introduced here in the next week. It's gonna take a lot of money.
What bill is that?
That's the accountability bill,
The
the
number
task
though?
force bill. And that task force has met for 2 years, and they came up with 30 recommendations. It also may just die under its own weight. There was a stakeholder meeting yesterday with task force members and districts, anyone who it would impact or is part of that community, and how the recommendations were interpreted into legalese. There was disagreement among task force members that isn't what they thought the intent was of legislation. So that's also where nothing may get done there. And it's disappointing, because there were some really good going on with the policy statement that would be right in line with that. So we'll see what happens there. There are a number of bills that have been introduced that are on your bill chart. Many, if not all, require some kind of state funding. So to put political capital into bills that likely will not get out of appropriations committee, we want to hold our political capital for the big fights, the ones that we really need to be there on.
When do you see those being?
School finance. Because there is a division within school finance, district to district. Because there were districts, even though in the end everyone supported the new School Finance Act, that RIF is started to show itself, and it got very, very ugly last week, very ugly last week. And they had to deal with the triggers.
And that was with the joint budget committee, or that was with the accountability, or?
It was with the joint budget committee and the speaker.
And?
The speaker.
The speaker.
Mm-hmm. And then the districts took sides. Did they want it to turn on, or do they not want it to turn on? How were the negotiations on those triggers? lots of conflicting information. So the speaker thankfully has called together a stakeholder meeting on Friday, and everybody will be in the room. But she was very, very angry with how it went last week.
Is pre-K funding any part of this cutback? We said, I heard the READ Act is protected and all others are on the table. Is the pre-kindergarten?
Well, preschool is funded with tobacco tax.
Externally.
Okay.
Yeah, so, that's also why we haven't seen flavor bans and things like that coming out of the state legislature, is because they need that money for preschool. So if the state is backfilling in any way, that yes, that will be on the table.
So it's outside of the School Finance Act. As Amy said, it comes through a variety of different funds. When the governor was at Audubon this week, and he might be speaking his own platform, the goal is to actually add hours funded by the state. And so we have a couple of minimal hour programs, but the demand has been strong across the state for an extended expansion of universal pre-K. We have asked if there was a way that in the future it can be included in the SFA. It would be easier for us to think about pots of money singularly. But in this instance, because there's pressure on the SFA, we're excited that the funding isn't in the SFA. UPK has been a tremendous win for District 11. We're at over 1,000 kids this year and on our way probably to 1,250 or 1,300 as we round out the rest of the year. As Child Find populates a lot of students at the end of the year because we preserve special ed seats. And we've gone from literally off the radar to the largest provider in El Paso County. And it also is, we're seeing strong matriculation into kindergarten. We hope to be stronger this year. I think we were at about 50% last year. What we find is a lot of parents will do whatever they can to find pre-K, and then they still want their neighborhood elementary school. And so we do have some out-of-district folks that participate in pre-K. But for us, it's been a very large win. And I think holistically for the system, any kid who's getting access to some time in pre-K that they weren't going to have without UPK means every district will benefit, because allowing kids to at least be social emotionally cognizant of their surroundings when they walk into a kindergarten classroom will increase kindergarten readiness standards, and then hopefully down the road, third grade READ Act scores.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything more that you need to share with the board at this time?
No, that's it.
Okay,
Unless
so
anyone
from
has
what I
questions.
hear, what you said with the new federal administration and the president's executive orders, there is not a clarity on that at this point in time. The state is pushing back. As we get clarity, we will let us know. Funding could potentially be impacted at the K-12 level. And bills with a fiscal note possibly are not going to pass. The concern there to me is that they're going to pass bills with unfunded mandates and push it on the school boards, school districts to figure out how to, hey, you figure it out at your district level. So it's always a concern. So I'm not a fan of all these bills with unfunded mandates that puts onus on the school districts to find the funding to solve these issues. If the state comes with mandates, get the funds for us to fund those things as well. Any other feedback at this time? The board also got that bill tracker list, so possibly you got to take a look at any of those bill trackers that are on there. We'll get to that as well. You had something else to add?
You bring up a very good point about unfunded mandates, and I am keeping an eye on that, particularly that bills don't get amended to either to put it onto the district, because we're seeing that in other areas, like in business, that instead of it being a state agency that enforces it, it becomes a private right of action and the courts enforce. So, or bills have a year or 2 year implementation deadline, so it pushes it out. So those kind of tactics are being used, but certainly the eye for an unfunded mandate, that it doesn't just get then pushed onto us. And data reporting is one of those, for sure.
Jason. Melissa, would you please scroll down on this document? And then zoom into the governing schools. Thank you so much. Supports the local control of school boards and opposes legislation that usurps the authority of local school boards. There are 5 bills already presented this year that are going against that very bullet point. Shall I name them? Devices in schools, genocide against Native American education, Department to modify the early childhood department, Black history and cultural education, and probably the worst of all, the library resources bill. These are all bills that are telling us how to do our job. And we have a bullet point right here that says this is our job. So I would be adamant to propose that this board comes against these 5 bills as you track them through the process here until May.
Well, not having read them, I wouldn't have an opinion yet. I understand our bullet point and I agree, but there's opposing and spending our resources opposing them in our political capital. And there's just like letting them go or an expression of a reminder for our legislators that this is important to us.
I mean, so law supports that bullet point.
Yes, it does.
Do we have an initial read on are any of those 5 likely to pass? Or is it too early for
Go through
that?
those again if you want.
Yeah,
I
maybe
thought
you
you
could
might
name
bring
the
up the
numbers.
library bill.
Yeah.
So I brought copies of the library bill. It was rewritten yesterday in committee.
That's 063.
Yes. So that was rewritten basically to say you need to have a policy, you need to use your policy and enforce your policy, and there are protections for librarians.
Yeah, and it dictates to us how we choose to either add or remove books, which is our job.
With a policy. You get to set your policy.
Another 1039 for us. How nice.
So I can leave that for you. If you want to go through those, I think I need time to.
Yeah, I can read them if you guys have your pens ready.
Yeah, at what point would we actually start taking a stand on things? Like it feels kind of early, but is that?
You know, it can be any time. I think back, the point of political capital of, is this, if you know the bill's going to die.
Yeah.
Because it's statement or has a huge fiscal note, then there is a different level of political capital that is spent. And on your side, if this is something where you want to make that statement that across the board, anything that erodes local control, you want to take an opposed position, and that is just standard. Of course, you would still officially take those positions. Then you can certainly do that. Do you want to list them for me?
Sure.
And then I will go away and put together a report for you.
So HB 251135 is the devices in schools, which we already have that policy taken care of, but again, just forcing us to make more policy if you didn't have one. Senate Bill 25123, which is the forcing curriculum about genocide against Native Americans. Senate Bill 25119, which is modifying the Department of Early Childhood Education. House Bill 251149 is forcing the CDE to do curriculum around Black history and cultural education. And then Senate Bill 25, which you brought tonight, 063, is the Library Resources Bill.
And I would actually also put onto your list, it was the last House bill that was introduced. It was just introduced this morning, and I printed this morning, so it may not have made it.
Is it 086?
No, it's a House bill, and it actually has to do with data reporting. So I will put that, I will add that to the list as well.
Data reporting?
Yes.
Uh,
It's with Representative Lucas.
1210.
Yes, 1210.
data reporting requirements for kindergarten through 12th grade schools.
And that,
Last action was yesterday, introducing that.
so I just want to be clear that I'm being given direction to bring forward a report with these bills and also to look specifically into bills that usurp local control.
Per this legislative agenda, right?
Yeah, but the reason she's checking is there are many things on the agenda, and is that our priority?
I'm not asking
versus-
us to take a stance or to put any capital into, these are bills that I think we should be updated on at the very bare minimum. And then if there gets to the point where it's like, hey, this thing could have legs, then we go, well, what bullet points does this fall under and how much do we wanna lobby on? That's all I'm asking tonight.
Okay. So first, thumbs up for the board direction on it. The 5 bills that were mentioned along with the 6th bill, 1210, about getting a report from Ms. Atwood. And then at a later point in time, when we have more information after reading that bill and figuring out if it's got legs, the board can take a stance on the bills collectively or individual bills on that.
I'm curious what said report would consist of when we have links to all of them, so we can all read the summaries. What kind of report are we looking for? Just whether or not she thinks it'll die in committee, or?
Yeah, I think it's the bill tracker she provided, and then
Right.
also just, hey, here's the update on that, cause you read things here, it's being heard here or amended here, she's gonna have the best pulse on it. So it'd just be, this has got legs,
Maybe
or this doesn't
a
have
higher
legs.
level executive summary, if you can do that, and, of each one of those bills. Okay. Thumbs up on that. Okay.
Okay.
Great. And then at a later point in time, we will follow up when we have additional information. I do expect some type of periodic update coming from you. I certainly don't expect you to join us in person, but because of your workload at this point in time, but we can figure that out once in a couple of weeks. If you want to join us remotely while you are at the state capitol, we can work that out so we can plug you in remotely. But the board would be interested, as we are going through this cycle, that we get periodic updates on progress on some of these bills.
And please remember that I'm always available. So if you have questions on bills, please don't hesitate to text me or call me or email. I'll be slower on email to respond than I will be on text because I'm talking all day and not on my computer. But please don't ever hesitate. And you don't have to know a bill number. Just, I know it's something to do with this, and I'll know what bill you're talking about.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or feedback to Ms. Atwood at this point in time? Okay.
I haven't actually read the bills myself, so I was hesitating on putting them out there to put on the radar, but I
Take
have
one, pass it
heard
around.
of Senate 153, I think, and it's something about new financial requirements to schools regarding transparency. And then there's another one, Senate Bill 27, trauma-informed safety practices. And like I said, I haven't actually read them myself to even really know the context, but I had heard about them somewhere else, and so maybe we just add that also to our
Sure.
radar. Thank you.
And I would say 1210 is the competing bill to 153.
1210 is the competing bill to what?
153.
Oh, interesting.
So there's 2 data reporting bills.
Oh.
And 153 is sponsored by the Senate Education Chair, and 1210 is by the House Education Chair. And 1210 is supported by districts, Rural Alliance, CASE, CASB.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So is there, remind me, is there a legislative day coming up at the state or has that date already passed?
Well, we've
Like
already,
for school boards to come in?
we already had the CASB day at the Capitol was last Thursday. There is another CASB something on the 27th. And so I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's in the morning. It's not a full day. But if you want to come up, just let me know and I can plan a day around you coming up and we can plan meetings around that. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay,
the winter legislative conference is the 27th and 28th for CASB. I do plan on going, so I'll send
Okay,
you a
great.
text.
Yeah.
And is Casby gonna be in the State House both those days?
Just one of the days, I'm trying to
I
pull it up
think
right
it's the
now.
27th in the morning from 9 to 11.
That sounds right to me.
Are they gonna be in the chambers?
Yes, they will be. Yeah, they'll both House and Senate will be in. How long they are that morning, we don't know, but we can send cards in and have them come out. We can speak to them in the lobby or just, out on the rails. To not just connect with our own delegation, because our own delegation is pretty in line with your values. It's some of the other legislators that it'd be great for us to connect with. And I do on your behalf.
Okay, thank you. But circling back to this document that is there on your screen, are there any revisions to this document, the legislative agenda, or is the board comfortable with what is on that document, considering that this is the board that adopted that document a year or so back?
In that first section, the last bullet point, we want to take that off as far as helping address pandemic learning loss. I feel like that's kind of behind us now, and we can just focus on getting kids.
Just learning loss.
Learning, yeah, not pandemic learning loss, now it's just trying to get better, so.
Okay.
I would propose removing that last bullet point.
Removing the last bullet point or just removing the word pandemic out there?
Oh, that's a good point. Whatever my board would like.
Okay. Well, at the very least, yeah, go ahead.
It would help if you kept that bullet point without pandemic.
Okay,
great.
Great.
There you go.
Thank you for your feedback. Is the board comfortable removing the language pandemic? Okay, great. Okay. Any other revisions to this document at this time? Can we go back to the first page? Thank you. We may want to check that numbers up there if those numbers are accurate as of this year. And if they are, they are. That's all I have. What's that?
I was curious about that too, the 900,000, annually during each legislative session, up to 100 bills are introduced. It's like, seems like it was
Well,
more,
it looks like
last year was like
more than 100
record-breaking. Yeah, so if
You
we
could
just
just
Well,
say
but,
up to
well, I
an
think it was-
arbitrarily large number, and then it would be true.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the only language change that is going to be there is remove the pandemic, and we'll, if necessary, update those numbers. Since the board gave a thumbs up to it, I don't think this is going to come back unless the board wants to adopt this agenda formally from the board. Is that
It might be part of our policy
Policy.
to adopt it.
Okay. If it is,
But it
then
doesn't hurt either for
yeah,
us to just do it.
if it is, it can come in March.
Annually adopt.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
May I make a suggestion that it actually is, we move the annually adoption to before January 8th?
Right.
That if it's done sometime in the fall,
Oh,
so that as we're going into session.
Can give it out
not
to,
after it's already started.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
see.
I mean, I would take it, this March goes all the way through next March. But if you want to take a look at it before we hit session, and then we also know if there's something very big, we could maybe move that up.
Dr. Ricks, can you note that language in that policy that was referenced attached with this? It says annually adopt, but attach a time frame that this is going to be adopted in late fall or something like that to the board consideration, so that
It does seem like you'd want to do it after the election.
after the election.
Just under the theory that, the board that's going to be looking at the legislative session next year will not be the same as this board.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
late fall.
Late fall, yeah, December or early January. So we are more timely. Usually it does come in early January. It's just that there has been a lot on the board agenda of late, so it's kind of got pushed back. Thank you for being here.
Is there anything you think we should know specific bill-wise? I feel like we got sidetracked before, at the library one. Is there anything else?
I don't really think so.
Okay.
I think the data reporting bill that just came out, we need to take time, I need to take time to go through it, and take a look at it. So, but again, the big fight is on school finance this year and pushing for the new school finance formula.
And pushing for.
The new school finance formula.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you driving up here
Yeah.
and meeting with us in person, and we look forward to further interactions with you as we proceed through this legislative cycle.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Two things, if
Okay,
are you
go
ready to
ahead.
wrap?
The other portion of the board agenda. Superintendent Gall, looks like you have 2 items.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with the board and the community that I had the great honor today with Sherry Callback and Julia Scott to present our 5-year on the clock briefing for Galileo Middle School to the State Board of Education. We pitched our community schools initiative, which the board had approved late last year on bringing some pathway schools into middle schools, starting with a community school at Galileo. Our briefing was very well received. We received a tentative 9-0 vote in support of that as the next step for Galileo Middle School with very strong comments. We'll include a link in an email to the board for you to be able to watch. It's about a 90 to a 120-minute session. Really strong collaboration with our partners at CDE and just really strong appreciation for our state board members of seeing the vision of what we believe a community school can do to a perpetually turnaround and priority improvement school. And if passed, we will now be the first community school, middle school in the state of Colorado. And then the second item is if you've seen on your email, due to the extreme cold forecast for this evening, we have a 2-hour delay for tomorrow. Stay warm, be safe, and everything will run 2 hours late.
Okay, sounds good. If there is nothing else to discuss at this point in time, this work session is officially adjourned at 7:55 p.m. Thank you.
I ended up with a extra.